Welcome to Crime Stories for Sleep, your destination for true crime sleep stories that help you drift into peaceful slumber. Tonight, we have a collection of calming true crime audio designed specifically for bedtime listening. Before we begin, these relaxing bedtime crime stories, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Are you settling in for the night with rain and wind sounds playing softly in the background? Or perhaps you're listening to these audio stories for sleep during a quiet afternoon? Whatever brings you here tonight, I hope these nighttime crime tales provide the perfect backdrop for rest and relaxation. Tonight's collection features sleep-friendly crime content from the year 2012, carefully crafted to be both engaging and soothing. These true crime for sleep stories are told with the gentle rhythm of rain sounds true crime listeners have come to love, creating an atmosphere of calm investigation and peaceful resolution. So adjust your pillows, get comfortable, and let these relaxing true crime stories guide you toward restful sleep. Whether you're a longtime fan of true crime bedtime stories or discovering true crime with rain sounds for the first time, these rainy night true crime tales are designed to ease your mind as you transition into slumber. Our first story takes us to the small coastal town of Millhaven, Oregon, where the autumn of 2012 brought more than just changing leaves and ocean breezes. Asterisk. Detective Sarah Chun had been with the Millhaven Police Department for 8 years when the call came in on October 15, 2012. It was a Tuesday morning, and the Pacific Northwest rain was falling steadily against the windows of the station house, creating that familiar drumming sound that locals had grown to find comforting. The call itself seemed routine at first, a missing person report filed by Margaret Torres, whose neighbor Elena Vasquez hadn't been seen for 3 days. Elena Vasquez was a 34-year-old librarian who lived alone in a small cottage on Seashore Drive, just 2 blocks from Millhaven's modest downtown district. She was known throughout the community as someone who kept to herself, but was always kind and helpful when approached. Her daily routine was as predictable as the tides. She would walk to the library each morning at 8:30, work until 5, stop by Murphy's grocery for whatever she needed, and return home by 6 in the evening. Margaret Torres lived in the cottage next door and had grown accustomed to seeing Elena's lights come on each evening around 6:15, followed by the warm glow of her reading lamp by 7. When those lights failed to appear for 3 consecutive nights, Margaret knew something was wrong. Detective Chun drove through the gentle rain to Seashore Drive, where the cottages sat like weathered sentinels overlooking the gray expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The autumn air carried the scent of salt and fallen leaves, creating an atmosphere that was both melancholy and peaceful. Elena's cottage, a modest blue structure with white trim and a small garden, appeared undisturbed from the outside. Margaret Torres met Detective Chun at the front gate, her silver hair tucked beneath a rain hat. At 72, Margaret had lived on Seashore Drive for nearly 4 decades and had developed the keen observational skills that come with age and routine. She explained that Elena's car, a reliable Toyota Corolla, was still parked in the driveway, and that Elena's newspaper from Sunday still sat on her front porch, now soggy from the persistent rain. The cottage's front door was locked, but Margaret had a spare key that Elena had given her for emergencies. As they entered the small living room, Detective Chun immediately noticed how tidy and organized everything appeared. Books were neatly arranged on shelves, throw pillows were perfectly positioned on the sofa, and there were no signs of struggle or disturbance. Elena's bedroom told a similar story of order and calm. The bed was made with military precision, her clothes were hanging neatly in the closet, and her bathroom toiletries were arranged with the same methodical care that seemed to characterize every aspect of her life. In the kitchen, Detective Chun found a single coffee cup in the sink and a half-eaten piece of toast on a plate, suggesting that Elena had begun her normal morning routine but had been interrupted. the absence of Elena's purse and keys suggested that she had left the house voluntarily, but her car remaining in the driveway presented a puzzle. Detective Chen made note of these details while Margaret provided background information about Elena's habits and personality. Elena Vasquez had moved to Millhaven 5 years earlier, taking the librarian position after the previous librarian had retired. She had come from Portland, seeking what she described to colleagues as a quieter life by the ocean. She had no family in the area and maintained few close friendships, though she was respected and liked by those who knew her. Her colleagues at the library described her as reliable, intelligent, and possessing a dry sense of humor that emerged once you got to know her. Detective Chen's investigation began with Elena's workplace. The Millhaven Public Library was housed in a charming brick building that had been constructed in 1923, featuring tall windows and the kind of hushed atmosphere that invited contemplation and study. Head librarian Robert Fitzgerald, a man in his early 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, expressed genuine concern about Elena's absence. According to Fitzgerald, Elena had worked her normal shift on Friday, October 12th, and had seemed perfectly normal. She had mentioned looking forward to a quiet weekend at home with some new books she had ordered. She had no vacation time scheduled and had never missed work without calling in advance. Her colleagues echoed these observations, painting a picture of someone who was both dependable and content with her solitary lifestyle. The investigation took Detective Chun through Elena's regular haunts in Millhaven's small business district. At Murphy's Grocery, store owner Tom Murphy confirmed that Elena had been in on Friday evening around 5:30, purchasing her usual items, fresh vegetables, whole grain bread, herbal tea, and a small container of locally made honey. She had seemed pleasant and had commented on the approaching storm, mentioning that she looked forward to spending the weekend reading while listening to the rain dot at the Millhaven Coffee House. Barista Jessica Ward remembered serving Elena her regular order, a large coffee with cream and a blueberry muffin on Saturday morning around 9 o'clock. Elena had sat in her usual corner table, reading a paperback novel while occasionally glancing out at the harbor. She had stayed for about an hour before leaving, and Jessica recalled thinking how peaceful Elena always seemed, as if she had found some secret to contentment that others were still searching for. Asterisk. The sighting at the coffee house on Saturday morning became significant because it was the last confirmed time anyone had seen Elena Vasquez. Detective Chun began to construct a timeline of Elena's final weekend, piece by piece, interview by interview. On Saturday afternoon, Elena had apparently returned home and spent time in her garden. Margaret Torres had seen her through the window, tending to her small collection of herbs and late-season flowers. The rain hadn't started yet, and Elena had seemed to be enjoying the mild October weather. Margaret had considered going over to chat, but had decided against it, knowing that Elena valued her privacy and quiet time. Sunday brought the first serious rain of the season, and Margaret Torres reported seeing lights in Elena's cottage throughout the day, suggesting that Elena was home. However, Margaret hadn't actually seen Elena herself, only the illumination from her windows and the occasional shadow moving past the curtains. Detective Chun expanded her investigation to include Elena's background and any potential connections. Outside of Millhaven, she contacted Elena's former employer in Portland, the Multnomah County Library, where Elena had worked for 7 years before moving to the coast. Supervisor Janet Morrison remembered Elena fondly, describing her as an excellent librarian who had expressed a desire for a simpler life in a smaller community. Elena's departure from Portland had been amicable and well-planned. She had given appropriate notice, helped train her replacement, and had left forwarding information for her final paycheck and any correspondence. Morrison confirmed that Elena had no workplace conflicts or unusual circumstances surrounding her departure. Asterisk. The investigation into Elena's financial records revealed a woman who lived simply and managed her money carefully. Her bank account showed regular deposits from her library salary and modest withdrawals for routine expenses. There were no large or unusual transactions, no evidence of debt or financial stress, and no patterns that suggested anything other than the quiet life of someone who had found contentment in simplicity. Detective Chun also examined Elena's personal relationships, though these proved to be limited. Elena had maintained occasional contact with a few former colleagues in Portland, exchanging holiday cards and brief emails, but these communications were infrequent and casual. She had no romantic relationships that anyone was aware of, and her social media presence was minimal, barely used. Facebook account with a handful of photos from her move to Millhaven and occasional posts about books she was reading. As the investigation continued into its second week, Detective Chun began to consider the possibility that Elena's disappearance might be voluntary. Perhaps Elena had decided she needed an even quieter life, or perhaps something had happened that made her feel she needed to leave suddenly. However, this theory was complicated by the fact that Elena's bank account remained untouched after Saturday morning, and her cell phone had been turned off or had lost power sometime Sunday evening. The search for Elena expanded beyond Millhaven's borders. Detective Chen coordinated with state police to check hospitals and transportation hubs throughout Oregon and into Washington and California. She also arranged for Elena's information to be entered into national missing person databases and worked with local media to publicize Elena's disappearance, though she was careful to maintain the calm, methodical approach that seemed appropriate for someone of Elena's temperament. The media attention brought several leads, though most proved to be false alarms. A woman matching Elena's description had been seen at a bus station in Eugene, but security camera footage revealed it was someone else entirely. Another potential sighting at a bookstore in Astoria similarly turned out to be a case of mistaken identity. However, one lead proved more promising. A hiker named David Prentice contacted police to report that he had seen a woman matching Elena's description on the coastal trail about 3 miles north of Millhaven on Sunday afternoon around 2 o'clock. The woman had been walking alone, carrying a small backpack, and had seemed to be moving with purpose rather than casual hiking. She had been wearing dark pants and a blue jacket, which matched clothing that Margaret Torres confirmed Elena owned. The coastal trail was a popular hiking destination that wound through forests and along cliff tops, offering spectacular views of the Pacific Ocean. It was exactly the kind of place someone might go for solitude and reflection, and it was well within walking distance of Elena's cottage. Detective Chun organized a search of the trail and surrounding areas, bringing in volunteers from the community and search and rescue teams from the county. The search revealed something significant about 2 miles into the trail. Elena's blue jacket was found caught on a branch about 20 feet off the main path, in an area where the trail curved close to a steep ravine. The jacket showed no signs of struggle or violence, but its location raised questions about how it had come to be there and why. Elena might have been off the main trail. Further searching in the area uncovered Elena's small backpack, which contained a water bottle, some energy bars, a paperback book, and a notebook with what appeared to be personal reflections written in Elena's careful handwriting. The notebook entries were dated throughout the month of October, and they revealed a woman who was struggling with feelings of loneliness and questioning whether her move to Millhaven had been the right decision. The notebook entries painted a picture of someone who was introspective and thoughtful, but also increasingly isolated. Elena wrote about her work at the library with genuine affection, describing the satisfaction she found in helping patrons find information and in maintaining the collection. However, she also wrote about feeling disconnected from the community and wondering whether she had chosen solitude over connection too completely. One entry, dated October 10th, was particularly revealing. Elena had written about a conversation with a patron at the library who had asked her about her family and whether she ever felt lonely living by herself. Elena's response in her notebook suggested that the question had unsettled her more than she had expected, forcing her to confront the possibility that she might have isolated herself too thoroughly in her pursuit of peace and quiet. The final entry in the notebook was dated October 14th, the day before Elena was reported missing. In it, she wrote about feeling restless and contemplating making changes in her life, though she didn't specify what those changes might be. She mentioned planning to spend the weekend thinking and perhaps taking a long walk to help clarify her thoughts. The discovery of Elena's belongings shifted the focus of the investigation to the area around the ravine where they had been found. The terrain was challenging, with steep drops and dense vegetation that made searching difficult. However, search teams continued their methodical work, understanding that Elena might have injured herself in a fall or become lost in the rugged landscape. On the fifth day of searching, volunteer searcher Michael Harrison spotted something unusual about 50 feet down the ravine. It was Elena Vasquez, and she was alive, though injured and weak from exposure and dehydration. She had apparently fallen from the trail while hiking on Sunday afternoon, sustaining a broken ankle and bruises that prevented her from climbing back up the steep slope. Elena had survived by rationing the supplies in her backpack and finding a small stream at the bottom of the ravine for water. She had lost her jacket in the fall, and it had been carried by wind to where searchers had found it. Her backpack had cushioned her fall, and she had managed to create a small shelter using fallen branches and her knowledge of survival techniques. Learned during her youth in rural Montana, the rescue operation required specialized equipment and careful coordination to safely extract Elena from the ravine. When she was finally brought to safety and transported to the regional hospital, she was suffering from dehydration, hypothermia, and her broken ankle, but she was alert and grateful to be found. During her recovery, Elena spoke with Detective Shun about her experience. She confirmed that she had gone hiking on Sunday afternoon to think about her life and her future in Millhaven. She had wandered off the main trail, drawn by what appeared to be a scenic overlook, when the ground had given way beneath her feet, sending her tumbling down into the ravine. Elena's ordeal had given her a new perspective on her life and her place in the Millhaven community. She spoke about how the concern shown by neighbors, colleagues, and even strangers during her disappearance had reminded her that connection and solitude didn't have to be mutually exclusive. She could maintain her quiet lifestyle while still being more open to the relationships and community that were available to her. The resolution of Elena Vasquez's disappearance brought relief to the Millhaven community and highlighted the importance of looking out for one another, even in a place where people valued their privacy and independence. Margaret Torres became even more attentive to her neighbors, and Elena herself made an effort to be more social, joining a book club at the library and occasionally accepting invitations to community events. Detective Shun filed her final report on the case with satisfaction, knowing that while Elena's disappearance had caused concern and required significant resources to resolve, it had ultimately had a positive outcome. The case also reinforced the value of thorough investigation and community cooperation in solving mysteries that might initially appear more sinister than they actually are. Elena's recovery was complete within a few months, and she returned to her work at the library with renewed appreciation for both her job and her community. She continued to live quietly, but she was no longer isolated, having learned that seeking peace didn't require complete withdrawal from human connection. Autumn rains that had been falling throughout Elena's ordeal eventually gave way to winter storms, and then to the gentle warmth of spring. Life in Millhaven returned to its peaceful rhythm, though residents perhaps paid a bit more attention to their neighbors and felt a deeper appreciation for the quiet bonds that held their small community together. Asterisk. Our next story takes us inland to Portland, Oregon, where the autumn of 2012 brought an unusual mystery to the city's vibrant arts district. The case began on November 3, 2012, when gallery owner Thomas Brennan arrived at his establishment, the Meridian Gallery, to find that several valuable paintings had been rearranged overnight, though nothing appeared to be missing. The Meridian Gallery occupied a converted warehouse space in Portland's Pearl District, featuring exposed brick walls and large windows that filled the space with natural light during the day. Thomas Brennan had owned and operated the gallery for 12 years, building a reputation for showcasing emerging Pacific Northwest artists alongside established names. His clientele appreciated his eye for quality work and his commitment to supporting local artistic talent. Thomas was a meticulous man who took pride in the presentation of his gallery. Each painting was positioned with careful consideration of lighting, sight lines, and the flow of visitors through the space. He knew exactly where each piece belonged and could sense immediately when something was out of place. That Saturday morning in November, his trained eye detected changes throughout the gallery that left him both puzzled and concerned. Asterisk. The rearrangements were subtle but deliberate. A landscape painting by local artist Maria Santos had been moved from the east wall to the west wall, while an abstract piece by Jonathan Reed had been relocated to where the Santos painting had been. Several smaller works had been shifted to different positions, and one sculpture had been rotated 90 degrees from its original orientation. However, Patricia's alibi for Friday night was solid. She had been photographing a wedding reception at a downtown hotel, with dozens of witnesses who could confirm her presence throughout the evening. The wedding photographer who had hired her as an assistant also verified that Patricia had worked until nearly midnight and had then returned directly to her apartment. The case seemed to be reaching a dead end when Detective Gonzalez received an unexpected phone call from Emma Brennan, Thomas and Patricia's daughter. Emma explained that she had heard about the gallery incident from her mother and wanted to share some information that might be relevant to the Thyroid Cohen. Investigation.Emma revealed that she had been struggling with feelings of guilt and resentment about her parents' divorce and her father's relationship with the gallery that she felt had contributed to the breakdown of their marriage. She had also been stressed about her college expenses and her mother's financial difficulties, feeling caught between her parents' complicated relationship. Several weeks earlier, Emma had taken a sculpture class as part of her art therapy program, and the instructor had assigned a project involving interventions in familiar spaces. Students were encouraged to make subtle changes to environments they knew well and to document how these changes affected their own perception and the perception of others. Emma had been thinking about her father's gallery and how the careful arrangement of artwork reflected his personality and his approach to life. She had wondered what would happen if the familiar order of the gallery were disrupted, whether her father might see the space and perhaps his own priorities differently. Emma confessed to Detective Gonzalez that she had used her knowledge of her father's routine and the gallery's security system to enter the building on Friday night. She had retained a key from years earlier when she had sometimes helped out at the gallery during high school, and she knew that the security system had a brief delay that allowed for entry before the alarm would be triggered if the correct code wasn't entered. Her plan had been simple: rearrange some of the artwork in ways that would be noticed but not destructive, creating what her sculpture instructor might call a quiet intervention in her father's carefully ordered world. She had hoped that the experience might prompt Thomas to think differently about what was truly important in his life, and perhaps to be more supportive of his family's needs. Emma had entered the gallery just after midnight on Saturday morning, moving quickly and carefully to relocate several pieces. She had chosen the new positions based on her own aesthetic judgment and her knowledge of how her father typically arranged the space. She had been careful to handle everything with respect, understanding the value and fragility of the artwork. After completing the rearrangements, Emma had left the gallery and reset the security system. knowing that her father would discover the changes when he arrived Saturday morning. She had expected him to be puzzled and perhaps frustrated, but she had hoped that the experience might lead to some positive changes in their relationship and his priorities. Detective Gonzalez found herself in the unusual position of having solved a break-in case where the perpetrator was the victim's own daughter, acting out of love and frustration rather than malicious intent. Emma's actions were clearly illegal, involving breaking and entering and unauthorized handling of valuable property, but her motivations were complex and understandable. When Detective Gonzalez arranged a meeting between Emma and Thomas to discuss the situation, the conversation was emotional and revealing. Thomas was initially shocked and hurt to learn that his daughter had been responsible for the gallery incident, but as Emma explained her feelings and motivations, he began to understand the deeper issues that had prompted her actions. Emma expressed her frustration at feeling like the gallery had always been more important to her father than his family, and her resentment at watching her mother struggle financially while Thomas poured his resources into his business. She explained that her art therapy studies had been teaching her about the power of symbolic actions to express feelings that were difficult to put into words. Thomas listened to his daughter's explanation with growing understanding and regret. He realized that his focus on building his business had indeed come at the cost of his relationships with his family, and that his reluctance to help with Emma's college expenses had been interpreted as a continuation of the priorities that had contributed to his divorce. The resolution of the case involved both legal and personal dimensions. From a legal standpoint, Thomas decided not to press charges against Emma, recognizing that her actions had been motivated by love and frustration, rather than malice. He also acknowledged that her handling of the artwork had been careful and respectful, with no damage done to any pieces. From a personal standpoint, the incident became a catalyst for improving Thomas's relationship with both Emma and Patricia. He agreed to help with Emma's college expenses and began making an effort to maintain better communication with both his daughter and his ex-wife. He also found that some of Emma's rearrangements had actually improved the gallery's layout, leading him to adopt a more flexible approach to the presentation of artwork. Emma's actions also led to an unexpected development in her artistic education. Her sculpture instructor was fascinated by the gallery project and its emotional and practical consequences, using Emma's experience as a case study in how art can intervene in real-world relationships and situations. Emma's work in art therapy was enriched by her deeper understanding of how creative expression could address complex family dynamics. The case concluded with Detective Gonzalez filing a report that emphasized the importance of understanding the human motivations behind criminal actions. While Emma's entry into the gallery was technically illegal, the resolution of the case through family reconciliation rather than prosecution seemed more appropriate given the circumstances and outcomes. Thomas Brennan continued to operate the Meridian Gallery with renewed appreciation for the balance between professional success and personal relationships. He also developed a new interest in conceptual art and intervention-based work, eventually mounting a show that featured artists who explored themes of space, arrangement, and the subtle ways that changes in environment can alter perception and understanding. The Portland art community, when they eventually learned about the incident, found it to be a fascinating example of how art and life could intersect in unexpected ways. The story became something of a legend in local art circles, illustrating how personal expression could emerge in surprising contexts and lead to positive changes in relationships and understanding. Our journey continues north to Seattle, Washington, where December 2012 brought an unusual mystery to the Capitol Hill neighborhood. The case began when Maya Patel, owner of Rainy Day Books and Coffee, discovered that someone had been entering her shop after hours and leaving behind carefully crafted coffee drinks and handwritten notes. Maya had opened Rainy Day Books and Coffee 3 years earlier, combining her love of literature with Seattle's legendary coffee culture. The shop occupied a corner building that had housed various businesses over the decades, and Maya had preserved its vintage charm while creating a warm, inviting space for readers and coffee lovers. Exposed brick walls displayed rotating art. From local artists, comfortable chairs were arranged near large windows, and the scent of freshly roasted coffee beans mixed with the smell of old books to create an atmosphere that regular customers found irresistible. The first sign that something unusual was happening came on December 4th, when Maya arrived at 7 o'clock in the morning to find a perfectly prepared cappuccino sitting on the counter near the espresso machine. The drink was still warm, and beside it was a small piece of paper with a note written in careful cursive handwriting. The note read simply, "Thank you for creating such a beautiful space. Someone who appreciates what you do." Maya's initial reaction was confusion mixed with concern. She had locked the shop securely the evening before, and the security system had been armed normally. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing was missing or damaged, and the cappuccino itself was expertly prepared with the kind of foam art that required considerable skill and practice. Asterisk. Detective James Sullivan was assigned to investigate what Maya reported as a possible breaking and entering case. When he arrived at the coffee shop that morning, he found Maya examining the mysterious cappuccino and note while trying to understand how someone could have entered her secured building. The shop's security system was relatively simple but effective, consisting of door and window alarms connected to a monitoring service. The system had not been triggered overnight, and Maya confirmed that she had set it properly when she left the previous evening. She was the only person with the access code, and she kept the only keys to the shop's front and back doors. Detective Sullivan examined the cappuccino, which showed signs of professional preparation. The espresso had been extracted properly, the milk had been steamed to the correct temperature and texture, and the foam had been poured to create a delicate leaf pattern on the surface. Whoever had prepared the drink clearly had extensive experience with commercial espresso equipment and understood the nuances of coffee preparation. What made this situation particularly unusual was that nothing was missing or damaged. The gallery's security system had not been triggered, and there were no signs of forced entry. Thomas kept detailed records of his inventory and careful checking confirmed that every piece in the gallery was accounted for. Whoever had rearranged the artwork had done so with obvious knowledge of how to handle valuable pieces and with respect for their condition. Detective Maria Gonzalez was assigned to investigate what initially seemed like a minor break-in case. She arrived at the gallery that afternoon to find Thomas walking slowly through the space, comparing the current arrangement with photographs he had taken the previous evening. His bewilderment was evident as he pointed out each change, explaining how the new positions affected the visual flow and lighting of each piece. The gallery's security system consisted of motion detectors and door alarms that were connected to a monitoring service. According to the security company's records, the system had been armed normally on Friday evening at 7:30 when Thomas left, and there had been no alerts or notifications throughout the night. The system had been properly disarmed when Thomas arrived Saturday morning using his access code. Detective Gonzalez examined the gallery thoroughly, looking for any signs of how someone might have entered without triggering the security system. The front door showed no evidence of tampering, and all windows were secure and unbroken. The back door, which led to an alley behind the building, was similarly undisturbed and had been locked with a deadbolt that required a key from both sides. The investigation revealed that access to the gallery was limited to 3 people: Thomas himself, his assistant curator Sarah Mitchell, and the cleaning service representative who came in twice a week. Thomas's access was obviously accounted for, and Detective Gonzalez arranged to interview both Sarah Mitchell and the cleaning service employee. Sarah Mitchell was a 28-year-old art history graduate who had worked with Thomas for 3 years. She was knowledgeable about the gallery's collection and shared Thomas's attention to detail regarding the presentation of artwork. When Detective Gonzalez interviewed her, Sarah seemed genuinely surprised to learn about the overnight rearrangements and had no explanation for how they might have occurred. Sarah confirmed that she had left the gallery at 5 o'clock on Friday evening, well before Thomas had closed and set the security system. She had no reason to return to the gallery overnight and had spent Friday evening at home with her roommate, watching movies and working on a graduate thesis about contemporary Pacific Northwest art. The cleaning service employee, Roberto Vega, had been responsible for the gallery's maintenance for 2 years. His schedule called for him to clean the gallery on Wednesday and Sunday evenings, always after hours and always with Thomas present to disarm and rearm the security system. Roberto had not been scheduled to work on Friday night and the cleaning service confirmed that he had worked his regular schedule at other clients throughout the evening. Detective Gonzalez expanded her investigation to include Thomas's personal and professional relationships, seeking to understand whether anyone might have had both access to the gallery and motivation to rearrange the artwork. Thomas was divorced and lived alone in a condominium about 10 minutes from the gallery. He maintained friendly but professional relationships with the artists he represented and had no known conflicts or disputes. The gallery's business records showed healthy sales and no financial difficulties. Thomas had built his reputation on honest dealing and fair treatment of artists, taking a reasonable commission on sales while ensuring that artists received fair compensation for their work. There were no disgruntled former employees or artists who might have held grudges against him. As Detective Gonzalez continued her investigation, she began to consider the possibility that the rearrangements might have been intended to convey some kind of message or to create a particular effect that would only be meaningful to someone with extensive knowledge of art and the specific pieces in Thomas's collection. She arranged to interview several of the artists whose work had been moved, beginning with Maria Santos, whose landscape painting had been relocated to a more prominent position on the gallery's west wall. Maria was a painter in her 40s who specialized in Pacific Northwest landscapes, capturing the subtle beauty of the region's forests, mountains, and coastal areas. Maria expressed surprise at learning about the overnight rearrangements but was pleased to hear that her painting had been moved to what Thomas considered a better location. She had no knowledge of how the changes might have occurred and had been at home with her family on Friday night. However, she did mention that she had recently been in contact with another artist, David Chun, who had expressed interest in having his work shown at the Meridian Gallery. David Chun was a sculptor and installation artist who had moved to Portland from San Francisco earlier in 2012. His work focused on themes of displacement and transformation, often involving the subtle manipulation of existing spaces to create new meanings and experiences. Maria had introduced David to Thomas at a gallery opening in October, and David had left a portfolio of his work for Thomas to review. Detective Gonzalez arranged to meet with David Chun at his studio, a converted garage space in southeast Portland, where he worked on his sculptures and conceptual pieces. David was a thoughtful man in his mid-30s who spoke carefully about his artistic philosophy and his interest in how small changes to familiar spaces could alter perception and understanding. When Detective Gonzalez explained the situation at the Meridian Gallery, David's response was both surprised and intrigued. He confirmed that he had left his portfolio with Thomas and was hoping to arrange a showing of his work. He had not heard back from Thomas yet, which he understood was normal given Thomas's busy schedule and careful consideration of new artists. David's alibi for Friday night was that he had been working alone in his studio, which was not uncommon for him. He often worked late into the evening and had no one who could verify his whereabouts. However, he seemed genuinely puzzled by the gallery incident and curious about the specific nature of the rearrangements. As they talked, Detective Gonzalez began to understand David's artistic approach better. His work often involved subtle interventions in existing spaces, creating what he called quiet disruptions that encouraged viewers to see familiar environments in new ways. His portfolio included photographs of installations where he had made small changes to public spaces, documenting how people responded to alterations they might not even consciously notice. The conversation with David. Chun led Detective Gonzalez to consider whether the gallery rearrangements might themselves be a form of artistic statement or intervention. Someone with David's aesthetic philosophy might view the unauthorized rearrangement of artwork as a conceptual piece, a way of commenting on the nature of curation and the relationship between art and its presentation. However, when she suggested this possibility to David, he firmly denied any involvement in the gallery incident. He explained that his work, while sometimes involving public spaces, always respected property rights and never involved entering private spaces without permission. He would never break into a gallery or manipulate someone else's collection without their consent. Detective Gonzalez found herself intrigued by the artistic dimensions of the case. The person who had rearranged the gallery's artwork had demonstrated both technical knowledge of how to handle valuable pieces and aesthetic judgment in their new placement. Thomas had admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that several of the new positions actually improved the visual flow of the gallery, though he emphasized that this didn't excuse the unauthorized entry. The investigation took a different direction when Detective Gonzalez learned about a recent development in Thomas's personal life. His ex-wife, Patricia Brennan, had contacted him several weeks earlier asking for financial assistance with their daughter's college expenses. Patricia was an artist herself, a photographer who had shown her work at the Meridian Gallery during the early years of their marriage. Thomas and Patricia had divorced 5 years earlier, and their relationship had been strained by disagreements over finances and Thomas's long hours at the gallery. Their daughter Emma was now a sophomore at Portland State University, studying art therapy, and Patricia was struggling to pay tuition and living expenses on her income as a freelance photographer. When Detective Gonzalez interviewed Patricia, she found a woman who was clearly stressed about money, but adamant that she had nothing to do with the gallery incident. Patricia confirmed that she had asked Thomas for help with Emma's expenses, and that he had been somewhat reluctant to provide assistance, citing his own financial obligations and the need to maintain boundaries after their divorce. Patricia had extensive knowledge of the Meridian Gallery, having been involved in its operation during her marriage to Thomas. She knew the security system, understood how the artwork was typically arranged, and had maintained keys to the gallery for several months after their separation before finally returning them at Thomas's request. The handwritten note was written on a piece of paper that appeared to have been torn from a small notebook. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, suggesting someone who took care with written communication. The message itself was polite and appreciative, showing no signs of threat or inappropriate intent. Detective Sullivan's investigation began with Maya's background and her relationships with customers, employees, and business associates. Maya was a 32-year-old who had moved to Seattle from San Francisco to open her coffee shop and bookstore. She was single, lived in an apartment about 6 blocks from the shop, and had built a loyal customer base who appreciated both her coffee expertise and her book recommendations. The shop employed 2 part-time baristas, Kevin Zhang, a graduate student at the University of Washington who worked morning shifts 3 days a week, and Lisa Rodriguez, a local artist who worked evening shifts and helped with the shop's art displays. Both employees had keys to the shop and knowledge of the security system, making them persons of interest in Detective Sullivan's investigation. Kevin Zhang was pursuing a master's degree in English literature and had been working at Rainy Day Books and Coffee for 8 months. He was known for his skill with the espresso machine and his knowledge of specialty coffee preparation. When Detective Sullivan interviewed him, Kevin seemed surprised to learn about the mysterious cappuccino and expressed genuine concern about the security breach. Kevin's alibi for the previous evening was that he had been at home working on a thesis paper about contemporary Pacific Northwest literature. His roommate confirmed that Kevin had been home throughout the evening, though he acknowledged that Kevin sometimes worked late into the night and could have left without being noticed. Asterisk. Lisa Rodriguez had been working at the coffee shop for 6 months, combining her job as a barista with her work as a painter and sculptor. She was less skilled with the espresso machine than Kevin, but was learning quickly and had shown genuine interest in coffee preparation. Her alibi for Monday night was that she had been at an art opening in the Fremont neighborhood, an event that had been attended by dozens of people who could confirm her presence. The investigation took an interesting turn when Maya discovered a second mysterious cappuccino on December 6th, accompanied by another handwritten note. This time, the note read, "Your book recommendations have changed my reading life. The corner table by the window has become my sanctuary." The cappuccino was again expertly prepared, and there were still no signs of forced entry or security. System activation. Detective Sullivan began to consider the possibility that the intruder was a customer who had somehow gained access to the shop, rather than an employee or someone with criminal intent. The tone of the note suggested someone who was deeply appreciative of Maya's business and wanted to express gratitude in an unusual but heartfelt way. Maya provided Detective Sullivan with information about her regular customers, focusing on those who spent significant time in the shop and had shown particular interest in her book, recommendations or coffee preparation methods. The corner table mentioned in the second note was a favorite spot for several regulars, including retired Professor Dr. Eleanor Whitman, freelance writer Marcus Thompson, and graduate student Amy Chun. Dr. Eleanor Whitman was a former English professor at the University of Washington who had retired 2 years earlier and had become one of Rainy Day's most faithful customers. She typically spent 2 to 3 hours each morning at the corner table, reading and grading papers for the tutoring service she had started in retirement. She was known for her extensive knowledge of literature and often engaged Maya in discussions about book recommendations and literary analysis. When Detective Sullivan interviewed Dr. Whitman at her home in the Wallingford neighborhood, he found a woman in her late 60s who was articulate, intelligent, and clearly devoted to Rainy Day books and coffee. She expressed concern about the security breaches, but seemed genuinely puzzled about how someone could be entering the shop without triggering alarms. Dr. Whitman confirmed that the corner table had become important to her daily routine and that Maya's book recommendations had indeed influenced her reading choices significantly. However, her alibi for both nights in question was solid. She lived with her sister Margaret, who confirmed that Eleanor had been home both evenings, engaged in their usual routine of dinner, television, and reading before bed. Marcus Thompson was a freelance writer who specialized in articles about Seattle's food and coffee culture. He had been a regular customer for about a year and had even written a brief article about Rainy Day books and coffee for a local lifestyle magazine. His work required extensive knowledge of coffee preparation and appreciation, making him someone who could certainly have prepared the mysterious cappuccinos. Marcus lived alone in a studio apartment in Capitol Hill, within walking distance of Maya's shop. When Detective Sullivan interviewed him, Marcus expressed fascination with the mystery and seemed genuinely intrigued by the artistic nature of the anonymous gifts. However, he also seemed surprised by the incidents and had no explanation for how someone might be gaining access to the shop. Marcus's alibi was less definitive than Dr. Whitman's, as he often worked late into the evening and had no one who could verify his whereabouts on the nights in question. However, Detective Sullivan found no evidence connecting Marcus to the incidents, and his personality seemed more consistent with someone who would approach Maya directly if he wanted to express appreciation for her business. Amy Chun was a graduate student in anthropology who used Rainy Day as a quiet place to work on her thesis research. She had been a regular customer for several months and had developed a friendly relationship with Maya, often discussing books and sharing recommendations. Amy was also interested in coffee culture as part of her anthropological studies and had asked Maya detailed questions about coffee preparation and the social aspects of coffee shop culture. When Detective Sullivan interviewed Amy, she seemed nervous and uncomfortable, though this might have been explained by the stress of graduate school and her unfamiliarity with police interviews. She confirmed that she spent significant time at the corner table and that Maya's recommendations had been valuable to her research. However, she also seemed genuinely surprised to learn about the mysterious cappuccinos and notes. Amy's alibi was that she had been at the university library on both evenings, working on research for her thesis. However, the library's security records showed that while she had entered the library on both days, there were periods when she could have left and returned without being specifically noticed by staff. As Detective Sullivan continued his investigation, Maya discovered a third cappuccino and note on December 9th. This note was longer and more personal. "Your shop has been a refuge during a difficult time in my life. The warmth and acceptance I feel here has helped me through challenges I couldn't have faced alone. I hope these small gifts convey even a fraction of my gratitude." The tone of this third note suggested someone who was dealing with personal difficulties and had found comfort and support in Maya's coffee shop. Detective Sullivan began to focus his investigation on customers who might be going through challenging life circumstances and who had the skills necessary to prepare professional quality coffee drinks. This led him to consider Daniel Morrison, a man in his early 40s who had become a regular customer about 6 months earlier. Daniel typically visited the shop in the late afternoon, ordering simple drinks and often sitting alone with a book or newspaper. Maya had noticed that he seemed somewhat sad or troubled, though he was always polite and appreciative when she served him. Maya knew very little about Daniel's personal circumstances, but she had observed that he sometimes seemed emotional while reading or staring out the window. She had occasionally offered him book recommendations, which he had accepted gratefully, and she had noticed that he always cleaned up after himself meticulously and seemed to appreciate the quiet atmosphere of the shop. Detective Sullivan located Daniel Morrison through the coffee shop's customer loyalty program records, which showed his phone number and email address. When he contacted Daniel to arrange an interview, Daniel's response was immediate and emotional. He asked to meet privately with Detective Sullivan and Maya, saying that he had something important to explain. The meeting took place at the coffee shop after hours, with Maya, Detective Sullivan, and Daniel sitting around the corner table that had been mentioned in mysterious notes. Daniel appeared nervous, but determined as he began to explain his involvement in the recent incidents. Daniel revealed that he was going through a difficult divorce and custody battle that had left him feeling isolated and depressed. His visits to rainy day books and coffee had become crucial to his emotional well-being, providing a sense of normalcy and human connection during a period when his personal life was in upheaval. Maya's kindness and the welcoming atmosphere of the shop had helped him get through some of his darkest moments. Daniel had extensive experience with coffee preparation, having worked as a barista during college and maintaining an interest in specialty coffee throughout his adult life. He had been laid off from his marketing job several months earlier, adding financial stress to his personal difficulties, and he had been spending his days job hunting and dealing with divorce proceedings. The mysterious cappuccinos had been Daniel's way of expressing gratitude to Maya, without drawing attention to his personal circumstances or making her feel obligated to provide emotional support beyond what naturally occurred through their customer relationship. He had been staying up late many nights, unable to sleep due to stress and anxiety, and had begun taking long walks through Capitol Hill during the early morning hours. Daniel explained that he had discovered the coffee shop's vulnerability by accident. During one of his sleepless walks, he had noticed that the back door to Maya's building occasionally swung open slightly when strong winds came through the alley. Investigation revealed that the door's latch was worn and didn't always catch properly when the door was pulled shut, creating a gap that was large enough to prevent the alarm from engaging, but not obvious to casual observation on the first night. He had entered the shop. Daniel's intention had been simply to sit quietly in the space that had become so important to his emotional well-being. However, once inside, he had felt compelled to create something beautiful as a way of giving back to Maya for all that her shop had meant to him. Preparing the cappuccino and writing the note had felt like a meaningful way to express feelings that he couldn't communicate directly. Daniel had returned on 2 subsequent nights, each time carefully entering through the improperly latched back door, and each time creating a cappuccino and note as expressions of gratitude. He had been meticulous about not disturbing anything else in the shop, and had made sure to pull the back door closed securely when he left, though the worn latch meant that it would likely come loose again during the next windstorm. Detective Sullivan found himself dealing with a case that was technically breaking and entering, but was motivated by genuine appreciation and emotional need rather than criminal intent. Daniel had clearly violated Maya's property rights and could have been charged with trespassing and breaking and entering, but his actions had caused no damage and had been intended to express gratitude rather than to take anything or cause harm. Maya's response to Daniel's explanation was compassionate and understanding. She could see the emotional pain he was experiencing and appreciated that his actions had been motivated by genuine gratitude rather than any desire to frighten or manipulate her. She was also impressed by the skill and care he had shown in preparing the cappuccinos and writing the thoughtful notes. Rather than pursuing criminal charges, Maya and Detective Sullivan worked together to find a solution that addressed the security issue while recognizing Daniel's emotional needs and his genuine remorse for his actions. Maya offered Daniel a part-time job helping with early morning preparation and opening procedures, which would give him legitimate access to the shop and provide him with some income during his job search. Daniel accepted Maya's offer gratefully, understanding that it represented both an opportunity for employment and a chance to make amends for his unauthorized entries. He also agreed to pay for the repair of the back door's latch mechanism and to contribute to upgrading the shop's security system to prevent similar incidents in the future. The resolution of the case had positive outcomes for everyone involved. Daniel's part-time work at the coffee shop provided him with structure and income during a difficult period in his life, while Maya gained an experienced and dedicated employee who brought professional coffee skills and genuine appreciation for the business. Detective Sullivan filed his report emphasizing the importance of understanding the human motivations behind unusual criminal cases and the value of seeking resolutions that address underlying problems rather than simply punishing violations. Daniel's case demonstrated how personal crisis could lead to poor decisions, but also how community support and understanding could help people find better ways to address their needs. The coffee shop's regular customers eventually learned about the mysterious cappuccino incident, and many found it to be a touching example of how businesses could become important sources of community and support for people going through difficult times. Daniel's story became a reminder of how small acts of kindness from business owners could have profound impacts on customers' lives. Maya upgraded her security system and repaired the back door, but she also made an effort to be more aware of customers who seemed to be struggling emotionally. She began hosting a weekly evening book discussion group that provided additional opportunities for community connection and support. And she made sure that her shop continued to be a welcoming space for anyone seeking comfort and human connection. Successfully navigated his divorce proceedings and eventually found full-time employment in his field, though he continued working part-time at Rainy Day Books and Coffee because of his genuine love for the work and the relationships he had built there. His experience during the difficult winter of 2012 had taught him valuable lessons about asking for help when needed and finding healthy ways to express gratitude and build community connections. Asterisk as we continue our collection of Calming True Crime Audio, we travel further north to Bellingham, Washington, where January 2013 brought an intriguing puzzle to the university town's quiet downtown district. The case began when retired English teacher Margaret Ellis discovered that someone had been leaving rare and valuable books on the doorstep of her independent bookstore, Village Books, during the early morning hours. Margaret had owned Village Books for 15 years, building it into a beloved community gathering place that served both the local residents and students from Western Washington University. The store specialized in literary fiction, poetry, and academic texts with particular focus on Pacific Northwest authors and environmental writing. Margaret's deep knowledge of books and her ability to match readers with exactly the right titles had earned her a loyal following throughout Whatcom County. The first mysterious delivery occurred on January 8th, when Margaret arrived at her store to find a cloth-wrapped bundle sitting beside the front door. Inside the cloth was a first edition copy of Sometimes a Great Notion by Ken Kesey, published in 1964 and in excellent condition. Tucked between the pages was a handwritten note that read, "For someone who truly understands the value of books, please find this a good home." Margaret examined the book carefully, her trained eye recognizing its authenticity and value. First edition Kesey novels in good condition were worth several $100s, making this an extraordinarily generous gift from an unknown donor. However, Margaret was also concerned about the legal and ethical implications of accepting valuable property from an anonymous source. The second delivery came 3 days later, consisting of a signed first edition of The Snow Leopard by Peter Matthieson, along with another note expressing appreciation for Margaret's work in promoting literature and supporting readers in the community. Again, the book was valuable and appeared to be authentic, wrapped carefully in cloth and left where Margaret would find it when she opened the store. Detective Sarah Kim was called in to investigate what Margaret reported as possible theft or fraud, though she emphasized that her primary concern was ensuring that the books were not stolen property and that their anonymous donor was not in some kind of trouble that prevented them from approaching her directly. Detective Kim's investigation began with examining the books themselves for any clues about their provenance. Both volumes showed signs of careful handling and storage, with no library markings or bookplate stickers that might indicate they had been stolen from institutions. The books appeared to have been part of a private collection maintained by someone with knowledge of proper book care and storage. Asterisk. The handwritten notes accompanying the books were written on high-quality paper in careful cursive script, suggesting someone with traditional education and an appreciation for the written word. The language used was formal and respectful, showing knowledge of literary terminology and genuine appreciation for Margaret's work as a bookseller. Margaret provided Detective Kim with information about her regular customers, focusing on those who showed particular interest in rare books and first editions. The store's clientele included several retired professors from Western Washington University, serious collectors of Pacific Northwest literature, and advanced students working on theses in literature and environmental studies. Professor Emeritus Robert Chun had been a regular customer since Margaret opened the store, and his personal collection of rare books was legendary among local bibliophiles. He had taught American literature at Western Washington University for 30 years before retiring, and had continued to visit Village Books regularly to browse and purchase books for his ongoing research projects. When Detective Kim interviewed Professor Chun at his home near the university campus, she found a man in his early 70s whose study was lined floor to ceiling with carefully organized books. Many volumes appeared to be rare or first edition copies, and Professor Chun clearly possessed the knowledge and resources necessary to have made the anonymous donations. Professor Chun expressed interest in the mystery but denied any involvement in leaving books at Margaret's store. He explained that while he certainly appreciated Margaret's work and had recommended Village Books to countless students and colleagues over the years. He would have approached her directly if he had wanted to donate books to the store. However, Professor Chun did mention that he had recently been contacted by the estate attorney for a former colleague, Professor Dorothy Larson, who had passed away in December 2012. Professor Larson had been a beloved member of the English department and had accumulated an extensive collection of rare books over her 40-year career. Her estate was in the process of distributing her possessions, and Professor Chun had been asked to help evaluate the literary collection. This information led Detective Kim to contact the estate attorney, Michael Patterson, who confirmed that Professor Larson's book collection was indeed being dispersed according to her will. Professor Larson had left specific instructions for some books to be donated to various libraries and educational institutions, but a significant portion of her collection was to be sold to provide funds for a scholarship program. However, Patterson explained that the estate was still in probate and no books had been officially distributed yet. He was concerned to learn that books matching the description of items from Professor Larson's collection might be appearing anonymously at local bookstores, as this could suggest that someone had gained unauthorized access to the estate property. Kim arranged to visit Professor Larson's home, which was being maintained by the estate pending final distribution of her possessions. The house was a modest craftsman-style home near the university, and Professor Larson's study contained an impressive collection of rare and valuable books, organized with obvious care and scholarly precision. Patterson confirmed that Professor Larson's collection included first-edition copies of both Ken Kesey and Peter Matthiessen works, among many other valuable volumes. He also explained that Professor Larson had been very specific in her will about which books should go to which institutions, suggesting that she would not have approved of anonymous donations that circumvented her carefully planned bequests. Investigation revealed that only a few people had legitimate access to Professor Larson's home and book collection. These included Patterson himself, Professor Chun as the appointed literary evaluator, and Professor Larson's niece, Jennifer Walsh, who had been helping to organize her aunt's personal effects. Jennifer Walsh was a graduate student in library science at the University of Washington who had been very close to her Aunt Dorothy. She had spent considerable time helping Professor Larson organize and catalog her book collection in the months before her death, and she had been deeply influenced by her aunt's love of literature and dedication to supporting young readers and writers. When Detective Kim interviewed Jennifer at her apartment in Seattle, she found a young woman who was clearly grieving the loss of her aunt and struggling with the complex emotions surrounding the distribution of Professor Larson's estate. Jennifer had hoped to inherit some of her aunt's books for personal reasons, but the will specified that most of the collection would be sold to fund scholarships. Jennifer initially denied any involvement in the mysterious book donations, but seemed uncomfortable and evasive when Detective Kim asked specific questions about her recent visits to Bellingham and her access to her aunt's collection. After further questioning, Jennifer admitted that she had been responsible for leaving the books at Village Books. Jennifer explained that she had been struggling with the impending sale of her aunt's book collection, feeling that many of the volumes deserve to be placed with people who would truly appreciate their literary and historical value rather than simply sold to the highest bidder. She had been particularly concerned about books that had special meaning to Professor Larson or that represented important works in Pacific Northwest literature. Jennifer had chosen Village Books as a recipient for some of the most meaningful volumes because she knew that her aunt had been a regular customer and had often spoken appreciatively of Margaret's knowledge and dedication to promoting literature in the community. She felt that Margaret would be able to find appropriate homes for the books with readers who would value them properly. The anonymous donations had been Jennifer's way of ensuring that some of her aunt's most treasured books would remain in the local literary community rather than being dispersed to unknown buyers through estate sales. She had been careful to choose books that she felt represented her aunt's values and interests, and she had hoped that the donations would honor Professor Larson's memory while supporting Margaret's work, Detective Kim found herself dealing with a case that involved both legal and emotional complexities. Jennifer's actions were technically theft from the estate, as she had taken books that legally belonged to the estate pending final distribution according to the will. However, her motivations were clearly based on love for her aunt and genuine concern for the preservation of literary culture, rather than personal gain. The resolution of the case required consultation with the state attorney Patterson and consideration of Professor Larson's original intentions as expressed in her will. Patterson acknowledged that Professor Larson had been very concerned about ensuring that her books found appropriate homes with people who would appreciate their value, and he agreed that her aunt would likely have approved of donations to Village books if they had been made through proper legal channels, rather than pursuing criminal charges against Jennifer. Patterson worked with Detective Kim to find a solution that honored both the legal requirements of the estate and Jennifer's desire to see her aunt's books placed appropriately. This involved Jennifer returning the donated books to the estate, and then working with Patterson to arrange legitimate donations to Village books and other local institutions that Professor Larson had supported. Margaret agreed to this arrangement, understanding that while she had genuinely appreciated the mysterious donations, it was important that they be made through proper legal channels. She also expressed interest in purchasing additional books from Professor Larson's collection through the estate sale, ensuring that more of the collection would remain accessible to the local literary community. Jennifer's actions, while legally problematic, had highlighted important questions about how literary estates should be handled and how the wishes of deceased collectors could be honored while still meeting legal requirements. Her case prompted Patterson to reconsider the estate's approach to book distribution, ultimately leading to arrangements that better reflected Professor Larson's values and interests. The final outcome included Jennifer performing community service at local libraries and literary organizations, allowing her to channel her passion for books and her desire to honor her aunt's memory into positive contributions to the community. She also worked with Patterson to create a more detailed plan for distributing Professor Larson's collection that took into account both legal requirements and the professor's known preferences and values. Margaret continued to operate Village books with enhanced appreciation for the role that independent bookstores play in preserving literary culture and supporting community connections around books and reading. The case had reminded her of the deep emotional connections that people form with books and the importance of ensuring that valuable literary collections find appropriate homes. Professor Larson's scholarship fund was successfully established, using proceeds from the estate sale, and several of her most significant books were donated to the Western Washington University library, where they would be available for research and study by future generations of literature students. Jennifer remained involved in administering the scholarship program, finding meaningful ways to continue her aunt's legacy of supporting young readers and writers. The case became a touchstone for discussions within Bellingham's literary community about the importance of planning for the disposition of personal book collections and the role that local bookstores and libraries play in preserving literary culture. Many collectors were inspired to be more specific in their wills about how they wanted their books to be distributed, and several local institutions developed new programs for accepting and managing literary donations. Our next story takes us south to Tacoma, Washington, where February 2013 brought a puzzling case to the city's thriving arts district. The mystery began when sculptor Janet Martinez discovered that someone had been entering her studio overnight and completing work on pieces she had left unfinished. Janet operated Cascade Sculptures from a converted warehouse space in Tacoma's museum district, where she created large-scale metal sculptures for public installations and private collectors. Her work was known throughout the Pacific Northwest for its flowing, organic forms that seemed to capture the movement of wind and water in static metal. The studio space was both workshop and gallery, with completed pieces displayed alongside. works in progress, and the specialized tools required for metalworking. The first incident occurred on February 12th, when Janet arrived at her studio to find that significant progress had been made on a piece she had been struggling with for several weeks. The sculpture, commissioned for a hospital garden in Seattle, was intended to suggest growth and healing through organic shapes that would catch and play with natural light. Janet had been having difficulty achieving the precise curve she envisioned for one section of the piece, and she had left it unfinished while she considered different approaches. When she arrived that Tuesday morning, she found that the problematic section had been completed with exactly the flowing, graceful lines she had been trying to achieve. The work was unmistakably in Janet's style and showed technical skill that matched her own expertise. The welds were clean and professional. The metal had been shaped with obvious understanding of her artistic vision, and the addition integrated seamlessly with the existing work. However, Janet was certain that she had not completed the work herself, and she was disturbed by the implications of someone entering her studio without permission. Janet examined her studio carefully, looking for signs of how someone might have gained access. The building's main entrance was secured with electronic locks, and her individual studio space within the building had additional security measures, including window alarms and motion detectors. Nothing appeared to have been disturbed beyond the work on the sculpture, and there were no signs of forced entry or security system malfunction. Detective Michael Torres was assigned to investigate what Janet reported as breaking and entering with vandalism, though she acknowledged that the unauthorized work on her sculpture was technically an improvement rather than damage. Detective Torres had limited experience with art-related crimes, but approached the case with careful attention to the unique circumstances involved. Detective Torres began his investigation by examining the completed work on Janet's sculpture. Even to his untrained eye, the new section appeared to be expertly crafted and consistent with the overall aesthetic of the piece. The technical quality suggested someone with professional-level metalworking skills and familiarity with Janet's artistic style and techniques. Janet provided Detective Torres with information about other artists who worked in the converted warehouse building, as well as former students, assistants, and colleagues who might have both access to the building and the skills necessary to complete the metalwork. The building housed 12 artists working in various media, from painters and photographers to furniture makers and jewelry designers. One of Janet's closest colleagues in the building was Thomas Kim, a furniture maker whose workshop was located directly across the hall from Janet's studio. Thomas worked primarily in wood, but had experience with metalworking from his training in industrial design, and he had occasionally borrowed tools from Janet for small metal components in his furniture pieces. When Detective Torres interviewed Thomas, he found an artist who was genuinely surprised to learn about the unauthorized work on Janet's sculpture. Thomas confirmed that he had metalworking experience and had observed Janet's techniques during their conversations about their respective crafts, but he denied any involvement in completing her sculpture. Thomas's alibi for the night in question was that he had been home with his partner, working on design sketches for a commissioned dining set. His partner confirmed this account, and Detective Torres found no evidence connecting Thomas to the incident. The investigation expanded to include other artists in the building and former students from the metalworking classes. Janet occasionally taught at Tacoma Community College. This led Detective Torres to interview several people who had both metalworking skills and familiarity with Janet's work. But initial interviews failed to identify anyone with both opportunity and apparent motivation to complete her sculpture. Case took on new dimensions when Janet discovered a second incident on February 19th. This time, someone had completed detailed work on a smaller piece that Janet had been developing as a study for a larger public sculpture. Again, the work was technically excellent and artistically consistent with Janet's vision, but she was certain that she had not completed it herself. The second incident was accompanied by a small piece of paper, tucked discreetly near the base of the sculpture. The note written in careful block letters, read, "Your work brings beauty to the world. Someone who believes in your vision." The note was unsigned and provided no direct clues about the identity of Janet's mysterious collaborator. Detective Torres arranged for the note to be examined for fingerprints and handwriting analysis, though the block lettering made it difficult to extract distinctive characteristics that might identify the writer. The paper appeared to be standard notebook paper, and the pen used was a common ballpoint type that would be difficult to trace. Janet's reaction to the second incident was more complex than simple frustration with the security breach. While she remained concerned about someone entering her studio without permission, she was also intrigued by the quality of the work being completed and the apparent understanding of her artistic intentions that the anonymous collaborator demonstrated. The understanding of her artistic intentions that the anonymous collaborator demonstrated. Note suggested that the person completing her work was motivated by admiration for her art, rather than any desire to harm or exploit her. However, Janet was also concerned about the legal and professional implications of someone else contributing to pieces that would be sold under her name and reputation. Detective Torres's investigation expanded to include Janet's exhibition history, recent sales, and interactions with collectors and art enthusiasts who might have developed an unusual attachment to her work. This led him to examine records from recent gallery showings and public art installations where Janet's work had been displayed. One exhibition that drew Detective Torres's attention was a group show at the Tacoma Art Museum the previous fall, where Janet had displayed several pieces alongside other regional sculptors. The exhibition had been well attended and had received positive reviews in local arts publications, potentially exposing Janet's work to new audiences. Exhibition records showed that the museum had conducted several educational programs in conjunction with the show, including studio visits and artist talks that would have provided interested viewers with detailed information about Janet's techniques and artistic philosophy. Detective Torres arranged to interview Museum Education Director Patricia Wong about participants in these programs. Patricia recalled that the programs had attracted a diverse group of participants, from serious art collectors to students and amateur artists interested in learning about sculpture techniques. One participant who had particularly impressed her was David Reeves, a retired machinist who had developed an interest in art after his retirement and had attended multiple programs to learn about different artistic techniques. David Reeves had worked for 35 years at a precision manufacturing company, developing expert-level skills in metalworking and fabrication. After retiring, he had begun taking art classes and visiting galleries and museums to explore his previously underdeveloped interest in visual art. Patricia remembered him asking detailed technical questions about metalworking techniques during Janet's presentation. When Detective Torres contacted David Reeves at his home in University Place, he found a man in his mid-60s who seemed nervous, but also somewhat relieved to be discussing the situation. David's garage had been converted into a workshop where he pursued various hobbies related to metalworking and craftsmanship, and his skills were immediately evident from the quality of tools and projects visible in the space. After initial questioning, David admitted that he had been responsible for the unauthorized work on Janet's sculptures. He explained that his involvement had grown out of deep admiration for Janet's artistic vision and a desire to contribute to work that he found meaningful and beautiful. David had attended Janet's presentation at the Tacoma Art Museum and had been profoundly moved by her discussion of how sculpture could capture natural forms and create emotional connections with viewers. As someone who had spent his career in precision manufacturing, he had been fascinated by the artistic applications of metalworking techniques he had used for purely functional purposes. After the museum presentation, David had begun following Janet's career more closely, visiting her exhibitions and reading about her public art installations. He had developed what he described as a deep appreciation for her artistic vision and a desire to somehow contribute to work that he found inspiring and important. David had gained access to Janet's studio through a combination of careful observation and his technical skills. He had noticed that the building's security system had a brief vulnerability during certain weather conditions when wind would interfere with one of the motion detectors, creating a window of opportunity for someone with knowledge of the system's operation. His first entry into Janet's studio had been motivated simply by curiosity and admiration. However, when he saw the sculpture that Janet had been struggling to complete, he had felt compelled to use his technical skills to help resolve the artistic challenge she was facing. His years of experience in precision metalwork had given him insights into how to achieve the flowing curves that Janet was seeking. David had completed the work carefully and respectfully, using Janet's own tools and materials, and following what he understood to be her artistic vision based on his observations of her other work. He had hoped that his contribution would be helpful rather than intrusive, though he acknowledged that he should have asked permission before entering her studio. The second incident had occurred when David had returned to see how Janet had responded to his first contribution. Finding that she seemed to have accepted and built upon his work, he had felt encouraged to complete another piece that appeared to be presenting similar technical challenges. Detective Torres found himself dealing with a case that involved clear violations of property rights and security, but was motivated by genuine artistic appreciation and a desire to contribute rather than to steal or damage. David's technical skills were impressive, and his understanding of Janet's artistic vision was sophisticated, but his methods of expressing this appreciation were obviously inappropriate. The resolution of the case required careful consideration of both legal and artistic issues. David had clearly committed breaking and entering, and his unauthorized work on Janet's sculptures raised complex questions about artistic integrity and authorship. However, his motivations were clearly benevolent, and the quality of his contribution suggested genuine understanding and respect for Janet's work. Rather than pursuing criminal prosecution, Detective Torres worked with Janet and David to find a solution that addressed the security violations while recognizing David's artistic interests and skills. Janet was impressed by David's technical abilities and his understanding of her work, though she remained concerned about the unauthorized nature of his contributions. The final resolution involved David performing community service related to arts education and security improvements for the artist's warehouse building. More significantly, Janet offered David the opportunity to work with her as a legitimate collaborator on future pieces, allowing him to contribute his technical skills while respecting her artistic vision and maintaining proper professional boundaries. David accepted this arrangement gratefully, understanding that it represented both a consequence for his inappropriate actions and an opportunity to channel his artistic interests in positive directions. He proved to be a valuable collaborator, bringing technical expertise that enhanced Janet's artistic vision while learning about the professional and ethical standards that governed artistic practice. The case had an ultimately positive outcome for both parties involved. Janet gained a skilled collaborator whose technical abilities enhanced her artistic capabilities, while David found a legitimate outlet for his artistic interests and a way to contribute to work that he found meaningful and inspiring. The incident also led to improvements in security for the artist's warehouse building and sparked discussions within Tacoma's arts community about appropriate ways for art enthusiasts to engage with and support working artists. Several educational programs were developed to provide legitimate opportunities for people with technical skills to collaborate with artists or contribute to community art projects. Janet's work continued to develop and evolve, incorporating new technical possibilities that emerged from her collaboration with David. The sculptures they completed together were well received by critics and collectors, and their partnership became a model for how technical expertise and artistic vision could be combined effectively. David's experience also inspired him to pursue more formal art education, and he eventually began teaching workshops that combined technical metalworking skills with artistic applications. His unique background in both manufacturing and art made him a valuable resource for artists seeking to develop their technical capabilities. Asterisk. We continue our journey through these relaxing true crime stories with a case from Olympia, Washington, where March 2013 brought an unusual mystery to the state capital's eclectic music scene. The case began when vintage guitar shop owner Patricia Yamamoto discovered that someone had been entering her store after hours and tuning all of her instruments to perfect pitch. Patricia owned Evergreen Strings, a beloved shop in downtown Olympia that specialized in acoustic guitars, mandolins, and other stringed instruments. The store served both serious musicians and casual players throughout the South Sound region, offering everything from student-grade instruments to rare, vintage pieces that attracted collectors from across the Pacific Northwest. Patricia had built her reputation on her ear for quality instruments and her skill at setup and repair work. The first incident occurred on March 5th, when Patricia arrived to open her store and immediately noticed that something was different about the sound environment. As someone who had worked with stringed instruments for over 20 years, Patricia was sensitive to the subtle acoustic qualities that indicated whether instruments were properly tuned and adjusted. Every instrument in the store, from the most expensive vintage Martin guitars to the basic student models, had been tuned to perfect pitch. This represented hours of careful work, as the store typically housed more than 60 instruments, and achieving perfect tuning required not only accurate pitch perception, but also understanding of how different instruments responded to environmental changes. Patricia examined each instrument carefully, finding that not only had they been tuned, but several had also received minor adjustments to their setups that improved their playability and sound quality. Bridge heights had been optimized, nut slots had been cleaned, and frets had been polished on instruments that had been showing signs of wear. The quality of the work was professional level, demonstrating both technical skill and deep understanding of how stringed instruments functioned. Patricia was impressed by the expertise shown, but she was also concerned about someone entering her store without permission and handling valuable instruments that could be easily damaged by inexperienced work. Asterisk. Detective Lisa Chun was assigned to investigate what Patricia reported as breaking and entering, though she noted that nothing had been stolen or damaged. Detective Chun had some background in music from her college years and could appreciate both the skill required for the work that had been done and the unusual nature of a break-in, where the perpetrator improved rather than damaged or stole property. Investigation began with examining how someone might have gained access to Evergreen Strings without triggering the security system. The store was located in a historic building in downtown Olympia, and Patricia had installed a basic alarm system that monitored doors and windows. However, the system had not been activated on the night in question, suggesting either that someone had the access code or that they had found a way to enter without opening monitored entry points. Patricia provided Detective Chen with information about people who had legitimate access to the store, including her business partner and co-owner, Marcus Johnson, who handled much of the repair work and specialized in vintage instrument restoration. Marcus had been working with Patricia for 5 years and possessed expert-level skills in instrument setup and repair. When Detective Chun interviewed Marcus at the store, she found him examining the work that had been done overnight with obvious professional interest. Marcus confirmed that the tuning and setup work was extremely high quality and had been performed by someone with significant expertise. However, he denied any involvement in the incident and seemed genuinely puzzled about how someone could have completed so much work in a single night. Marcus's alibi for the previous evening was that he had been at home with his family, practicing with his bluegrass band for an upcoming performance. His wife and teenage daughters confirmed that he had been home throughout the evening. working on arrangements for new songs the band was preparing to perform. The investigation expanded to include other musicians and instrument repair specialists in the Olympia area who might have both the skills necessary to perform the work and some connection to Evergreen Strings. This led Detective Chun to interview several professional musicians, music teachers, and instrument repair specialists who were part of the local music community. One person who drew Detective Chun's attention was Rebecca Martinez, a classical guitarist and music instructor who taught at the Evergreen State College and maintained a private studio for advanced students. Rebecca was known throughout the region for her precise technique and her insistence on perfect tuning and setup for all instruments used in her teaching and performance. Rebecca had been a customer of Evergreen Strings for several years, purchasing instruments for her teaching studio and occasionally bringing pieces to Marcus for repair and setup work. She possessed the technical skills necessary to perform the work that had been discovered, and her perfectionist approach to music was consistent with the meticulous nature of the overnight tuning session. When Detective Chun interviewed Rebecca at her home studio near the college campus, she found a musician whose dedication to technical excellence was immediately apparent. Rebecca's instruments were all maintained in perfect condition, and her studio space was organized with the kind of precision that suggested someone who valued perfection in all aspects of her musical practice. Rebecca expressed surprise at learning about the incident at Evergreen Strings, but Detective Chun noticed that she seemed uncomfortable and evasive when asked about her activities on the evening in question. Rebecca claimed to have been home practicing, but she lived alone and had no one who could verify her whereabouts during the relevant time period. The investigation took an interesting turn when Patricia discovered a second incident on March 12th. Again, every instrument in the store had been tuned to perfect pitch, and several had received additional setup improvements that enhanced their playability and sound quality. This time, however, there was also a handwritten note left discreetly behind the counter. The note, written in careful cursive handwriting, read, "Music brings harmony to the world, but only when instruments are properly maintained. Please don't let these beautiful voices fall silent through neglect." The note was signed simply, "A friend who cares about music." Detective Chun arranged for handwriting analysis of the note and began comparing it with samples from people who had been interviewed in connection with the case. The cursive style was distinctive and appeared to have been written by someone with formal education in penmanship, suggesting an older person or someone with traditional academic background. The tone of the note provided insights into the motivation behind the mysterious tuning sessions. Rather than being motivated by desire to steal or damage property, the person responsible seemed to be driven by genuine concern for the instruments and frustration with seeing valuable musical tools not maintained to their full potential. This perspective led Detective Chun to consider whether the incidents might be connected to someone who had observed that instruments at Evergreen Strings were not being maintained to professional standards. While Patricia and Marcus were knowledgeable about instrument care, the demands of running a retail business sometimes meant that routine maintenance tasks, like tuning and minor adjustments, were deferred in favor of serving customers and handling repairs. Detective Chun returned to interview Rebecca Martinez, this time focusing more directly on her feelings about instrument maintenance and her observations of conditions at Evergreen Strings. Under closer questioning, Rebecca admitted that she had been concerned about the state of some instruments she had seen during her visits to the store. As someone who demanded perfect pitch and optimal setup from all instruments used in her teaching and performance, Rebecca had been troubled by seeing valuable instruments sitting untuned or with minor setup problems that affected their playability. She had mentioned these concerns to Patricia and Marcus on several occasions, but felt that her suggestions were not being taken seriously enough. Rebecca eventually admitted that she had been responsible for the mysterious tuning sessions at Evergreen Strings. She explained that her actions had grown out of genuine concern for the instruments and frustration with what she perceived as neglect of valuable musical resources. Rebecca had gained access to the store through a back window that had a faulty latch mechanism. She had discovered this vulnerability during a previous visit when she had noticed the window moving slightly in the wind. Her background in classical music had made her comfortable with precise physical manipulations required for instrument maintenance, and she had successfully entered the store without triggering alarms. Her first visit had been motivated simply by curiosity about the condition of instruments after hours, but when she found instruments that were significantly out of tune and in need of basic maintenance, she had felt compelled to address these issues. Her training and perfectionist temperament made it difficult for her to leave instruments in suboptimal condition when she had the skills to improve them. The second visit had occurred when Rebecca had returned to check on the instruments and had found that some had already drifted out of tune again due to temperature and humidity changes. She had decided to complete another comprehensive tuning session and had left the note to try to communicate her concerns about the importance of regular instrument maintenance. Detective Chun found herself dealing with a case where criminal trespass had been motivated by genuine care for musical instruments and frustration with perceived neglect, rather than any desire for personal gain or property damage. Rebecca's actions were clearly illegal, but her motivations were rooted in professional standards and concern for preserving musical resources. The resolution of the case required consideration of both legal violations and the underlying issues that had motivated Rebecca's actions. Patricia and Marcus acknowledged that they had sometimes fallen behind on routine instrument maintenance due to business pressures, and they appreciated Rebecca's expertise and dedication, even while recognizing that her methods were inappropriate. Rather than pursuing criminal charges, Detective Chun worked with all parties to find a solution that addressed the security violations while also improving instrument maintenance at Evergreen Strings. Rebecca agreed to perform community service by teaching instrument care workshops for local musicians and students, sharing her expertise in legitimate educational settings. More significantly, Patricia and Marcus offered Rebecca a part-time position at Evergreen Strings, specifically focused on instrument setup and maintenance. This arrangement would ensure that instruments in the store were maintained to professional standards while providing Rebecca with legitimate access to pursue her passion for optimal instrument condition. Rebecca accepted this arrangement gratefully, recognizing that it provided a legal outlet for her perfectionist tendencies and her desire to see musical instruments maintained properly. She proved to be a valuable addition to the Evergreen Strings team, bringing expertise that enhanced the store's reputation for quality instruments and professional service. The case had positive outcomes for everyone involved. Patricia and Marcus gained a skilled colleague whose expertise improved their business operations, while Rebecca found a legitimate way to contribute to the care and maintenance of musical instruments in her community. The incident also led to improvements in security for Evergreen Strings and sparked discussions within Olympia's music community about the importance of proper instrument maintenance and the role that different musicians could play in supporting each other's work. Several collaborative programs were developed to share expertise and resources among local musicians and music educators. Rebecca's workshops on instrument care became popular among local musicians, and her emphasis on the connection between proper maintenance and musical expression helped many players improve both the condition of their instruments and the quality of their performances. Her unique combination of technical expertise and passionate advocacy for musical excellence made her a valuable resource for the entire music community. Asterisk. Our collection of these true crime stories to fall asleep to continues with a journey across the border to Vancouver Island, British Columbia, where April 2013 brought an intriguing mystery to the ferry routes that connect the island's communities. The case began when BC Ferries employee Jonathan Wright discovered that someone had been leaving beautifully crafted wooden carvings on various ferry vessels during overnight layovers, the ferry system serving Vancouver Island's coastal communities was a vital transportation link that connected remote towns and villages with larger centers like Victoria and Nanaimo. The vessels ranged from large ships capable of carrying hundreds of passengers and vehicles to smaller boats that served the most isolated communities with essential supplies and mail service. That Jonathan Wright worked as a maintenance supervisor for BC Ferries, responsible for the overnight cleaning and routine maintenance of vessels when they were docked between runs. His duties included inspecting safety equipment, overseeing cleaning crews, and ensuring that each vessel was prepared for the next day's passengers. The first carved piece appeared on April 8th aboard the Queen of Oak Bay, a mid-sized vessel that served routes between Sydney and the Gulf Islands. Jonathan discovered the carving during his routine morning inspection, finding it placed carefully on a window ledge in the main passenger lounge where it would be easily visible but not interfere with normal operations. The carving was a detailed miniature of a Pacific Northwest scene, featuring a small sailboat navigating between tree-covered islands with mountains visible in the background. The work was approximately 6 inches long and showed exceptional craftsmanship in both the carving technique and the attention to realistic detail. The wood appeared to be native cedar, finished with a clear protective coating that would preserve it in the marine environment. Attached to the carving was a small tag with handwritten text that read, "For the travelers who find beauty in our coastal waters, may your journeys be safe and filled with wonder." The message was unsigned, but the paper and handwriting suggested someone who took care with written communication and understood the significance of the ferry system to island communities. Jonathan examined the carving carefully, his appreciation for craftsmanship honed by his own hobby of woodworking. The piece showed advanced skill in both design and execution, requiring not only artistic ability, but also technical knowledge of wood properties and finishing techniques. The choice of scenes seemed specifically tailored to the ferry route, suggesting familiarity with the waters and islands served by the Queen of Oak Bay. Royal Canadian Mounted Police Constable Maria Santos was assigned to investigate what BC Ferries reported as unauthorized boarding and possible vandalism, though Jonathan emphasized that the carving was clearly a gift rather than damage to ferry property. Constable Santos had grown up on Vancouver Island and was familiar with the ferry system and the tight-knit communities it served. The investigation began with examining how someone might have gained access to the ferry during its overnight layover at the Sydney terminal. The vessels were secured overnight, with access limited to authorized maintenance and security personnel. However, the terminal's waterfront location and the practical requirements of ferry operations created opportunities for someone with knowledge of the system to board undetected. Jonathan provided Constable Santos with information about people who had legitimate access to the ferry during overnight periods, including other maintenance staff, cleaning crews, and security personnel. However, he also noted that the ferry's location at the public terminal meant that determined individuals with knowledge of boat access could potentially board from the waterside during periods when security attention was focused elsewhere. The investigation expanded when a second carving appeared on April 15th aboard the Maine Queen, which served routes between the southern Gulf Islands. This carving depicted a group of orcas swimming near Saturna Island, carved with the same exceptional skill and attention to detail as the first piece. Again, there was an accompanying note expressing appreciation for the ferry system and wishes for safe travels. Constable Santos began to consider the possibility that the carvings were being created by someone with intimate knowledge of the ferry routes and the communities they served. The choice of scenes for each carving seemed specifically related to the waters through which each vessel traveled, suggesting either extensive local knowledge or careful research into the routes and their scenic highlights. The investigation led Constable Santos to interview members of the island communities, who were known for their woodworking skills and their connection to the ferry system. The Gulf Islands had a strong tradition of artisanal crafts, and several residents were known for their wood carving and their dedication to preserving the region's maritime heritage. One person who attracted Constable Santos's attention was Thomas Anderson, a retired ferry captain who had spent 30 years working the island routes before retiring to Salt Spring Island. Thomas had developed an extensive knowledge of the waters, wildlife, and scenic features of the region, and he had taken up wood carving as a retirement hobby that allowed him to capture the beauty of the coastal environment he had known professionally. When Constable Santos visited Thomas at his workshop on Salt Spring Island, she found a man in his early 70s whose small studio was filled with beautifully crafted wooden sculptures depicting various aspects of coastal British Columbia life. His work showed the same attention to detail and technical skill that characterized the mysterious ferry carvings. Thomas expressed interest in the ferry carvings when Constable Santos described them, and he was clearly impressed by the skill level they demonstrated. However, he denied any involvement in placing carvings on the ferries, explaining that while he certainly had the knowledge and skills necessary, he would have approached BC Ferries directly if he had wanted to donate artwork to the fleet. However, Thomas did mention that he had been teaching wood carving workshops at the Gulf Islands Community Arts Center, and several of his students had shown exceptional aptitude for the craft. He also noted that his workshops had attracted people from various islands who shared his appreciation for the region's maritime heritage and his desire to preserve it through artistic expression. This information led Constable Santos to investigate the Community Arts Center and its woodworking programs. The center served residents throughout the Gulf Islands, offering classes in various traditional crafts and providing space for local artists to pursue their work. The woodworking program had been particularly popular, attracting people who wanted to learn traditional carving techniques and create pieces that reflected their connection to the coastal environment. Arts Center Coordinator Jennifer McKenzie confirmed that Thomas Anderson's woodworking classes had been well attended and had produced several students whose work showed exceptional promise. She also mentioned that the classes had fostered discussions about the role of the ferry system in island life and the importance of preserving the cultural and natural heritage of the coastal communities. One student who had particularly impressed both Thomas and Jennifer was David Chun, a software engineer who had moved to Pender Island, seeking a quieter lifestyle and a deeper connection to traditional crafts. David had shown natural ability for wood carving and had been especially interested in creating pieces that captured the maritime environment of his new home. David had attended most of Thomas's workshops over the past year and had developed advanced skills in both carving technique and wood finishing. His background in technology had given him a systematic approach to learning the craft, while his enthusiasm for his new island lifestyle had inspired him to focus on maritime themes in his work. When Constable Santos contacted David at his home on Pender Island, she found a man in his late 30s whose garage workshop contained evidence of serious commitment to wood carving as both hobby and artistic pursuit. His completed pieces showed progression from basic exercises to sophisticated works that demonstrated real artistic vision and technical competence. David initially seemed surprised to learn about the ferry carvings, but as Constable Santos described them in more detail, he appeared to become uncomfortable and evasive. His workshop contained tools and materials that could have been used to create the ferry carvings, and several pieces in progress showed maritime themes similar to those found on the ferries. Under more direct questioning, David admitted that he had been responsible for placing the carvings on the BC Ferries vessels. He explained that his actions had grown out of deep appreciation for the ferry system and a desire to contribute something beautiful to the travel experience of fellow island residents and visitors. David had moved to Pender Island from Vancouver, seeking a simpler lifestyle and a stronger connection to the natural environment. The ferry rides to and from the island had become an important part of his new routine. providing time for reflection and appreciation of the coastal scenery that had drawn him to island life. As his wood carving skills developed through Thomas's workshops, David had begun creating pieces inspired by scenes he observed during his ferry travels. His technical background had helped him approach the craft systematically, while his enthusiasm for his new environment had provided artistic inspiration for maritime themes. David had decided to leave his carvings on the ferries as anonymous gifts to other travelers who might appreciate the beauty of the coastal environment. His knowledge of ferry schedules and operations, gained through his regular travel as an island resident, had enabled him to place the carvings during periods when vessels were accessible but not actively in service. His first carving had been placed somewhat impulsively during a late evening ferry ride, when he had lingered on deck after most passengers had gone indoors. He had simply left the piece in a location where other travelers would find it, hoping that it might bring a moment of beauty to someone's journey. The positive reception of his first piece, which he had observed through discussions among ferry passengers on subsequent trips, had encouraged David to continue creating and placing carvings. Each piece was specifically designed to reflect the route and scenic highlights of the vessel on which it was placed, requiring research into ferry schedules and routes, as well as careful timing of placement. Constable Santos found herself dealing with a case where unauthorized boarding and property placement had been motivated by genuine desire to contribute beauty and community spirit rather than any criminal intent. David's actions were technically violations of transportation regulations, but his motivations were clearly positive, and his carvings had been received enthusiastically by ferry passengers and crew. The resolution of the case required coordination between Constable Santos, BC Ferries management, and David himself to find an approach that addressed the regulatory violations while recognizing the positive community response to his artwork. BC Ferries officials acknowledged that while David's methods were inappropriate, his carvings had been well received by passengers and had created positive publicity for the ferry system. Rather than pursuing criminal charges, BC Ferries worked with Constable Santos and David to develop a formal program that would allow him and other local artists to contribute artwork to the ferry fleet through proper channels. This included establishing procedures for evaluating and installing donated artwork that would enhance the travel experience while meeting safety and security requirements. David agreed to this arrangement and became the first participant in BC Ferry's new community art program. His subsequent carvings were installed through official channels, with proper recognition of his contribution and appropriate placement that considered both aesthetic and practical concerns. The case had positive outcomes that extended beyond resolving David's unauthorized activities. The community art program, developed in response to his initiative, became popular among island artists and ferry passengers, creating opportunities for local artists to contribute to the travel experience while providing ferry users with enhanced appreciation for the natural and cultural heritage of the coastal region. David's work became a catalyst for broader community discussions about the role of art in public spaces and the ways that transportation systems could serve as venues for cultural expression. His carvings continued to inspire other artists to create works that celebrated the maritime environment and the communities connected by the ferry system. Thomas Anderson's woodworking workshops gained new participants inspired by David's example, and the Gulf Islands Community Art Center developed additional programs focused on maritime themes and public art. The incident demonstrated how individual initiative, even when initially misdirected, could lead to positive community outcomes when channeled through appropriate institutional frameworks. Our final story in this collection of rainy night true crime tales takes us to Victoria, British Columbia, where May 2013 brought a gentle mystery to the city's famous Butchered Gardens. This case began when head gardener Elizabeth Morrison discovered that someone had been visiting the gardens after hours and performing expert-level maintenance work on some of the most challenging plantings. The Butchered Gardens, one of Victoria's most beloved attractions, encompassed 55 acres of meticulously maintained themed gardens that drew hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. The gardens required constant attention from a skilled team of horticulturists who understood both the aesthetic principles of landscape design and the complex botanical requirements of plants from around the world. Elizabeth Morrison had worked at Butchered Gardens for 12 years, rising to the position of head gardener through her combination of formal horticultural education and intuitive understanding of how plants responded to the coastal British Columbia climate. She took pride in maintaining the gardens to the highest standards, ensuring that each themed area remained true to its original design while adapting to changing conditions and plant needs. The first sign that something unusual was happening came on May 7th, when Elizabeth arrived for her morning inspection of the Japanese garden and found that extensive pruning and shaping work had been completed on several ornamental trees and shrubs. The work was expertly done, demonstrating advanced knowledge of proper pruning techniques and deep understanding of how different plants responded to various forms of maintenance. The pruning had been performed with obvious skill and artistic sensibility, enhancing the natural beauty of each plant while maintaining the overall aesthetic balance of the garden space. Several trees that Elizabeth had been planning to work on later in the season had been shaped precisely as she would have done the work herself, saving hours of skilled labor while producing results that met professional standards. Elizabeth examined the work carefully, her trained eye recognizing the expertise required to achieve such results. The person responsible had used proper tools, made cuts at correct angles and locations, and had clearly understood both the horticultural requirements of each plant and the aesthetic principles that guided the garden's design. However, Elizabeth was also concerned about liability issues and the potential risks of unauthorized persons working in the gardens with sharp tools and potentially dangerous equipment. The gardens maintained strict safety protocols and insurance requirements that could be compromised by unauthorized maintenance work, regardless of its quality. Royal Canadian Mounted Police Constable David Kim was assigned to investigate what Butchered Gardens management reported as trespassing and unauthorized maintenance activities. Constable Kim had limited background in horticulture, but could appreciate both the skill level of the unauthorized work and the legitimate concerns about security and liability that it raised. The investigation began with examining how someone might have gained access to the gardens outside of normal operating hours. Butchered Gardens maintained security systems and night patrols, but the extensive grounds and natural boundaries created challenges for comprehensive surveillance. Someone with knowledge of the garden's layout and security procedures might be able to find opportunities for unauthorized access. Elizabeth provided Constable Kim with information about current and former employees who would have the horticultural skills necessary to perform the quality of work that had been observed. The gardens employed both full-time and seasonal staff members, and several former employees had left on good terms and maintained friendships with current staff. One person who drew Constable Kim's attention was James McLeod, a retired horticulturist who had worked at Butchered Gardens for 25 years before retiring the previous winter. James had been responsible for the Japanese garden during much of his tenure and had developed particular expertise in the pruning and shaping techniques required for traditional Japanese landscape design. James had retired reluctantly, forced by health issues rather than desire to leave his work. He had expressed ongoing concern about whether the gardens would maintain the same standards of care for the specialized plantings he had tended for so many years. His deep emotional attachment to the gardens and his expert knowledge of their requirements made him a logical person of interest in the investigation. When Constable Kim visited James at his Victoria home, he found a man in his mid-60s whose small yard was maintained with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized his professional work. James's garage contained professional quality, gardening tools and reference books that indicated continued, serious engagement with horticulture despite his retirement. James seemed pleased to discuss the gardens and expressed genuine interest in learning about the unauthorized maintenance work. However, when Constable Kim described the specific work that had been observed, James appeared to become uncomfortable and evasive, claiming that his health problems prevented him from performing the kind of physical labor that had been done. Investigation expanded when Elizabeth discovered a second incident on May 14th, this time involving expert deadheading and fertilization work in the rose garden. Again, the work was performed to professional standards and showed intimate knowledge of the specific requirements of different rose varieties and their optimal care schedules. The second incident was accompanied by a small note tucked discreetly among the roses, written in careful handwriting on garden center stationery. The note read, "These gardens have brought joy to countless visitors over the years. Please know that someone still cares deeply about maintaining their beauty for future generations to enjoy." The note provided insight into the motivation behind the unauthorized maintenance work, suggesting someone who felt emotionally connected to the gardens and was concerned about their continued care. The tone was respectful and appreciative rather than critical, indicating that the person was motivated by love for the gardens rather than dissatisfaction with current maintenance standards. Constable Kim arranged for handwriting analysis of the note and began comparing it with samples from people who had been interviewed in connection with the case. The handwriting appeared to be that of an older person with traditional penmanship training, consistent with someone who had received formal education several decades earlier. The investigation took a different direction when Elizabeth mentioned that she had recently been approached by Margaret Chen, the widow of a former head gardener who had passed away the previous year. Margaret had asked about the possibility of creating a memorial garden or plaque to honor her late husband's contributions to Butchered Gardens, and she had seemed concerned about whether current staff understood the specialized care requirements he had established for certain plantings. Robert Chun had worked at Butchered Gardens for 30 years before retiring and had been particularly known for his expertise in rose cultivation and Japanese garden maintenance. His widow Margaret had maintained the extensive home garden that Robert had created during his retirement, and she possessed considerable horticultural knowledge gained through decades of working alongside her husband. When Constable Kim interviewed Margaret at her home in Saanich, he found a woman in her early 70s whose property showcased the same attention to horticultural excellence that had characterized her husband's professional work. Her garden contained numerous specimens that appeared to be propagated from Butchered Gardens plantings, suggesting ongoing connection to the professional garden collection. Margaret initially seemed surprised to learn about the unauthorized maintenance work at Butchered Gardens, but as Constable Kim described the incidents in more detail, she appeared to become emotional and conflicted. Her knowledge of specialized garden maintenance techniques was evident from their conversation, and her deep attachment to the gardens was clear in the way she spoke about her husband's work there. Under gentle questioning, Margaret admitted that she had been responsible for the unauthorized maintenance work at Butchered Gardens. She explained that her actions had grown out of grief for her husband and concern about whether the gardens he had loved were receiving the specialized care he had provided. Throughout his career, Margaret had gained access to the gardens through her knowledge of security routines and her familiarity with less monitored entrances that she had learned about during her husband's employment. Her advanced age and respectable appearance had also allowed her to avoid suspicion during the few occasions when she had been observed on the grounds. Her first visit had been motivated simply by desire to see how the gardens were being maintained in areas where her husband had worked. However, when she observed plants that she felt needed attention, she had been unable to resist applying the knowledge and techniques that Robert had taught her over the years. Margaret's subsequent visits had been carefully planned to address specific maintenance needs that she observed during her reconnaissance of the gardens. She had brought her own tools and materials, working during early morning hours, when the gardens were closed but natural light was sufficient for detailed work. Each visit had been both a way of honoring her husband's memory and ensuring that his standards of care were maintained in the gardens he had devoted his career to improving. Margaret felt that her unauthorized work was a continuation of Robert's legacy and a way of ensuring that future visitors would experience the same beauty that had been his passion. Constable Kim found himself dealing with a case where trespassing and unauthorized maintenance had been motivated by grief, love, and genuine concern for horticultural excellence rather than any criminal intent. Margaret's actions were clearly violations of property rights and safety regulations, but her motivations were deeply personal and her work had been beneficial rather than harmful. The resolution of the case required sensitive handling of both legal violations and the emotional issues underlying Margaret's actions. Butcher Gardens management recognized that while her methods were inappropriate, her work had been professionally competent and her concerns about garden maintenance were based on legitimate expertise, rather than pursuing criminal prosecution. Constable Kim worked with Gardens management and Margaret to find a solution that addressed the trespassing violations while honoring both her expertise and her emotional connection to the gardens. This resulted in Margaret being offered a volunteer position that would allow her to contribute to garden maintenance through official channels. Margaret accepted this arrangement gratefully, understanding that it provided legitimate outlet for her desire to continue her husband's work while respecting the garden's operational requirements and safety protocols. She proved to be a valuable volunteer whose knowledge enhanced the garden's maintenance program and provided continuity with historical care practices. The case also led to the establishment of the Robert Shun Memorial Garden, a special area dedicated to showcasing the specialized horticultural techniques that he had developed during his career. Margaret became actively involved in designing and maintaining this memorial space, finding meaningful way to honor her husband's legacy while contributing to the garden's ongoing mission. The incident demonstrated how grief and love could motivate behavior that, while technically inappropriate, stemmed from genuine care and expertise. Margaret's story became an example of how institutions could respond to such situations with understanding and creativity, finding ways to channel personal passion into positive contributions, while maintaining necessary boundaries and procedures. Her work as a volunteer inspired other retired horticulturists and garden enthusiasts to become involved with Butcher Gardens, creating a program that drew on the community's expertise while providing meaningful engagement opportunities for people who shared passion for gardening excellence. Before we conclude our evening of true crime stories to fall asleep to, we have two more gentle mysteries from 2012 to share. Our next story takes us to Eugene, Oregon, where June 2012 brought an unusual case to the university town's public library system. The mystery began when senior librarian Catherine Wells discovered that someone had been organizing and cataloging books in the library's storage areas. During after-hours periods, the Eugene Public Library served both the university community and local residents, housing an extensive collection that included rare books, historical documents, and specialized research materials. Due to budget constraints and staff limitations, many valuable items were stored in basement areas and back rooms, where they awaited proper cataloging and integration into the main collection. Catherine Wells had worked at the library for 18 years and was intimately familiar with every aspect of the collection, including the backlogged materials that represented years of donations and acquisitions that hadn't yet been fully processed. She took pride in the library's organization and was frustrated by the practical limitations that prevented her from addressing these storage areas as thoroughly as she would have preferred. The first sign that something unusual was happening came on June 18th, when Catherine arrived for her morning shift and discovered that several boxes of donated books in the basement storage room had been expertly sorted and organized. The books were arranged by subject matter and condition, with detailed handwritten notes describing their contents and potential value to the collection. The organizational work was clearly the result of someone with extensive library science, knowledge, and genuine understanding of cataloging principles. Each book had been examined carefully, and the sorting reflected both practical considerations like condition and rarity, and scholarly understanding of how materials would best serve library patrons. Catherine examined the work with professional appreciation, recognizing the hours of skilled labor that had been invested in organizing materials that had been sitting untouched for months. However, she was also concerned about security implications and the possibility that valuable items might have been taken during the unauthorized access to storage areas. Detective Robert Martinez was assigned to investigate what the library reported as possible breaking and entering with theft concerns. Detective Martinez had a background in education and could appreciate both the value of library collections and the legitimate security concerns that unauthorized access created. The investigation began with examining how someone might have gained access to the library's storage areas during closed hours. The building's security system monitored main entrances and public areas, but storage rooms and basement areas had less comprehensive coverage. Someone with knowledge of the building's layout and security procedures might have found opportunities for access. Catherine provided Detective Martinez with information about current and former staff members who would have the library science skills necessary to perform the organizational work that had been observed. The library employed both professional librarians and part-time staff, and several former employees had left on good terms and maintained friendships with current staff. One person who drew Detective Martinez's attention was Professor Diana Chang, a recently retired library science instructor from the University of Oregon, who had been a frequent volunteer at the public library during her academic career. Professor Chang had expertise in cataloging and collection management and had often expressed concern about the backlogged materials that weren't being processed quickly enough. When Detective Martinez visited Professor Chang at her home near the university campus, he found a woman in her mid-60s whose personal study was organized with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized professional library collections. She possessed extensive knowledge of cataloging systems and had maintained professional relationships with library staff throughout her career. Professor Chang seemed interested to learn about the mysterious organizational work, and she was clearly impressed by the expertise it demonstrated. However, she denied any involvement in after-hours library activities, explaining that while she certainly had the necessary skills, she would have approached library management directly if she wanted to volunteer for collection organization work. The investigation expanded when Catherine discovered a second incident on June 25th, this time involving detailed cataloging work in a different storage area. Again, the work was performed to professional standards and included comprehensive notes about each item's potential significance to the collection. A handwritten note was left with this batch of work, reading, "These materials deserve to be accessible to researchers and students. Someone who believes in the importance of preserved knowledge." Detective Martinez arranged for handwriting analysis of the note and began to focus on people who combined library science expertise with passionate advocacy for making information accessible. This led him to consider Michael Torres, a graduate student in library science, who had been working as a part-time cataloger at the library for the past year. Michael was pursuing a master's degree in library and information science while working part-time to support his studies. He had consistently expressed frustration about the pace at which backlogged materials were being processed, often staying late to work on cataloging projects and advocating for additional resources to address storage backlogs. When Detective Martinez interviewed Michael, he found a young man whose commitment to library principles was evident in both his academic work and his professional aspirations. Michael possessed the technical skills necessary to perform the organizational work that had been observed. and his passionate advocacy for information access was consistent with the tone of the note that had been left. Under careful questioning, Michael admitted that he had been responsible for the after-hours organizational work in the library's storage areas. He explained that his actions had grown out of frustration with seeing valuable materials sitting unprocessed while students and researchers remained unaware of their existence. Michael had gained access to storage areas using his employee key card during periods when he was scheduled to work late, extending his authorized time in the building to work on projects that weren't part of his official duties. His knowledge of the building's security systems and his legitimate presence during evening hours had allowed him to work undetected on materials that he felt deserved immediate attention. His unauthorized work had been motivated by genuine belief that library collections should be accessible to users rather than sitting in storage indefinitely. Michael had carefully documented his work and had chosen materials that he felt would be most valuable to the academic community, focusing on items that complemented existing collection strengths. Detective Martinez found himself dealing with a case where unauthorized access and work had been motivated by professional dedication and commitment to library principles rather than any desire for personal gain. Michael's actions were violations of employment policies and building security, but his motivations were rooted in service to library users and dedication to information access. The resolution of the case required consideration of both policy violations and the valuable work that Michael had contributed. Library management acknowledged that while his methods were inappropriate, his cataloging work was professionally competent and had addressed real needs within the collection development program. Rather than terminating Michael's employment or pursuing criminal charges, Detective Martinez worked with library administration to develop a solution that addressed the policy violations while recognizing Michael's commitment and skills. This resulted in Michael being assigned to a special project focused on processing backlogged materials. With appropriate supervision and recognition of his contributions, Michael accepted this arrangement gratefully, understanding that it provided legitimate outlet for his passion for making library materials accessible, while respecting proper procedures and supervision requirements. His work on the special project became a model for addressing collection backlogs and inspired additional funding for cataloging programs. The case had positive outcomes that extended beyond resolving Michael's unauthorized activities. His initiative led to renewed focus on processing backlogged materials and resulted in improved access to valuable resources that had been unavailable to library users. Several rare and significant items that Michael had identified were integrated into the main collection where they became available for research and study. The incident also prompted discussions within the library profession about how to balance security requirements with the passion for information access that motivated many library workers. Michael's story became an example of how institutional responses could channel professional dedication into positive outcomes while maintaining necessary policies and procedures. Asterisk. Our final story in this collection of calming true crime audio takes us to Salem, Oregon, where September 2012 brought a heartwarming mystery to the city's Saturday farmers market. The case began when market coordinator Helen Rodriguez discovered that someone had been leaving anonymous payments and thank you notes for vendors who were struggling financially. The Salem Saturday Market operated in downtown Salem's riverfront park, bringing together local farmers, artisans, and food vendors to serve the community with fresh produce, handmade crafts, and prepared foods. The market served as both economic opportunity for small businesses and community gathering place where residents could connect with local producers and each other. Helen Rodriguez had coordinated the farmers market for 5 years, building relationships with vendors and understanding the economic challenges that many faced in maintaining small-scale agricultural and artisan businesses. She took pride in supporting local entrepreneurs while creating a welcoming environment that served the broader community's needs. The first anonymous payment appeared on September 8th, when Helen arrived early to set up for the weekly market and found an envelope addressed to the Tomato Lady tucked under the information booth. Inside was $40 in cash and a handwritten note expressing appreciation for quality produce and encouragement for a vendor who was known to be struggling with late-season crop challenges. The Tomato Lady was Maria Gonzalez, whose small farm had been hit hard by early blight that had reduced her tomato harvest significantly. Maria had been coming to the market faithfully, despite having less produce to sell, and regular customers had noticed her smaller displays and worried expressions as she calculated whether market fees could be justified by reduced sales. Helen delivered the envelope to Maria, who was moved to tears by both the financial assistance and the kind words from an anonymous supporter. The note had clearly been written by someone who understood the challenges of small-scale farming and appreciated the quality that Maria maintained. Despite her difficulties, the second anonymous payment appeared on September 15th, this time for Robert Kim, a woodworker whose handcrafted furniture had been attracting admiration but few buyers in the challenging economy. The envelope contained $60 and a note praising Robert's craftsmanship, while acknowledging the difficulty of maintaining traditional skills in a world increasingly dominated by mass production. Jennifer Walsh was assigned to investigate what Helen reported as possible fraud or suspicious activity, though she emphasized that her primary concern was ensuring that the anonymous payments weren't connected to illegal sources or inappropriate motivations. Detective Walsh had grown up in Salem and was familiar with the farmers market as both community institution and economic lifeline for local producers. The investigation began with examining the envelopes and notes for clues about their origin. The handwriting was neat and careful, suggesting someone who took time to craft thoughtful messages. The paper was standard stationery, and the cash appeared to be genuine bills in various denominations, suggesting someone who was accumulating money from normal sources rather than any suspicious activities. Helen provided Detective Walsh with information about regular market customers who showed particular interest in supporting vendors and understanding their challenges. The market attracted many people who valued local production and often expressed concern about the economic pressures facing small businesses. One customer who drew Detective Walsh's attention was Dr. Patricia Chun, a retired economics professor who had become a regular at the farmers market after moving to Salem from Portland. Dr. Chun often engaged vendors in conversations about their businesses and had demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the challenges facing small-scale producers. When Detective Walsh visited Dr. Chun at her Salem home, she found a woman in her early 70s whose interest in local economics was evident from her bookshelves and her articulate discussion of agricultural and artisan business models. Dr. Chun expressed interest in the anonymous payments and seemed genuinely impressed by the thoughtfulness they demonstrated. However, Dr. Chun denied involvement in the anonymous payments, explaining that while she certainly supported local vendors, through her purchases, she would approach struggling businesses directly if she wanted to provide additional assistance. She also noted that her fixed retirement income would make it difficult for her to provide significant anonymous donations. The investigation expanded when Helen discovered additional anonymous payments over the following weeks, each targeted to vendors who were facing particular challenges and each accompanied by notes that demonstrated intimate knowledge of their situations and genuine appreciation for their contributions to the community. Detective Walsh began to consider the possibility that the anonymous donor was someone who spent significant time at the market and had opportunities to observe vendors closely and understand their circumstances. This led her to focus on people who were present regularly and had both the knowledge and resources necessary to identify appropriate recipients. One person who fit this profile was Thomas Anderson, a retired banker who had become a dedicated volunteer at the farmers market, helping with setup and assisting vendors with booth arrangements and customer service. Thomas had extensive knowledge of each vendor's situation and had often expressed concern about the economic challenges they faced. When Detective Walsh interviewed Thomas, she found a man in his late 60s whose retirement had been financially comfortable and whose volunteer work at the market had become a central part of his weekly routine. Thomas possessed both the financial resources and the detailed knowledge of vendor circumstances that would enable him to make appropriate anonymous donations. Under gentle questioning, Thomas admitted that he had been responsible for the anonymous payments to struggling market vendors. He explained that his actions had grown out of deep appreciation for the community that the farmers market created and concern about vendors who were struggling to maintain their businesses. Thomas had observed the financial pressures facing many vendors and had been moved by their dedication to continuing their work despite economic challenges. His background in banking had given him understanding of the difference that modest financial assistance could make during difficult periods, while his volunteer work at the market had provided him with knowledge of which vendors were most in need of support. The anonymous payments had been Thomas's way of providing assistance without creating embarrassment or obligation for recipients. He had carefully chosen amounts that would be helpful without being so large as to create suspicion or discomfort, and had crafted notes that expressed genuine appreciation while maintaining his anonymity. Detective Walsh found herself dealing with a case where the only crime was excessive generosity and thoughtfulness. Thomas's actions were entirely legal and motivated by pure desire to support community members who were providing valuable services while facing economic difficulties. The resolution of the case involved simply understanding Thomas's motivations and ensuring that his generous impulses were channeled in ways that continued to benefit the market community. Helen and other market organizers were moved by Thomas's dedication and worked with him to develop more formal programs that could provide support for struggling vendors while maintaining the dignity and independence that were important to both donors and recipients. Thomas agreed to help establish a market assistance fund that could provide emergency support for vendors facing temporary difficulties, while also continuing his personal donations in a more open manner that allowed recipients to express their gratitude directly. His example inspired other market supporters to contribute to vendor assistance programs and to be more mindful of ways they could support local businesses beyond their regular purchases. The case had positive outcomes that strengthened the farmers' market community and created models for mutual support that were replicated in other markets throughout the region. Thomas's story became an example of how individual generosity could inspire broader community action and create sustainable systems for supporting local entrepreneurs. His work at the market continued with enhanced official recognition of his contributions, and he became a spokesperson for the importance of supporting local food systems and artisan businesses. The Market Assistance Fund that grew out of his individual initiative provided ongoing support for vendors while creating opportunities for community members to contribute to local economic development. Before we bring our evening of true crime stories to fall asleep to its gentle close, we have two more mysteries from 2012 to share. Our next story takes us to the rugged Oregon coast, where August 2012 brought an intriguing case to the historic town of Astoria. The mystery began when lighthouse maintenance supervisor William Hayes discovered that someone had been performing expert restoration work on the abandoned North Head Lighthouse during nighttime hours. The North Head Lighthouse, perched on dramatic cliffs overlooking the mouth of the Columbia River, had been decommissioned for regular navigation use, but remained an important historical landmark, managed by the Oregon State Park System. The lighthouse required constant maintenance to preserve its structure against the harsh coastal environment, but budget constraints often meant that restoration projects had to be delayed or performed with limited resources. William Hayes had worked in lighthouse maintenance for 15 years, developing expertise in the specialized skills required to preserve these maritime monuments. He understood both the historical significance of the structures and the technical challenges involved in maintaining century-old buildings in one of the most challenging environments on the Pacific coast. The first sign that something unusual was happening came on August 14th, when William arrived for his weekly inspection of the North Head facility and discovered that extensive restoration work had been completed on the lighthouse's exterior trim and window frames. The work was expertly executed, using appropriate materials and traditional techniques that maintained the historical authenticity of the structure. The restoration included careful scraping and repainting of weathered wood surfaces, replacement of deteriorated glazing compounds and window frames, and minor repairs to masonry that had been damaged by winter storms. Every detail showed understanding of both historical preservation standards and the specific challenges of maintaining structures in marine environments. William examined the work with professional appreciation, recognizing the hours of skilled labor and the expensive materials that had been invested in improvements that the park system had been planning, but couldn't afford to implement immediately. However, he was also concerned about liability issues and the safety risks involved in unauthorized persons working at dangerous heights with specialized equipment. Oregon State Police Detective Amanda Foster was assigned to investigate what the Parks Department reported as trespassing and unauthorized construction activities. Detective Foster had some background in historical preservation through her volunteer work with local heritage organizations, and she could appreciate both the value of the restoration work and the legitimate concerns it raised. The investigation began with examining how someone might have gained access to the lighthouse site during closed hours and obtained the specialized equipment necessary for high-altitude restoration work. The lighthouse was located in a remote area that was officially closed to public access during nighttime hours, but its isolated location also made it possible for determined individuals to approach undetected. William provided Detective Foster with information about contractors and craftspeople who had worked on lighthouse restoration projects in the past, as well as volunteers and enthusiasts who had expressed particular interest in maritime preservation. The lighthouse attracted visitors from around the world who were passionate about maritime history and preservation. One person who drew Detective Foster's attention was Samuel Morrison, a retired ship's carpenter who had moved to the Astoria area specifically because of his interest in maritime history and his desire to contribute to preservation efforts. Samuel had extensive experience in traditional woodworking and marine construction techniques that would be directly applicable to lighthouse restoration. When Detective Foster visited Samuel at his workshop near the Astoria waterfront, she found a man in his early 70s whose workspace contained traditional woodworking tools and materials that indicated serious commitment to historical restoration work. His knowledge of maritime construction techniques was evident from both his conversation and examples of his craftsmanship. Samuel expressed genuine interest in learning about the unauthorized restoration work and seemed impressed by the expertise it demonstrated. However, he denied any involvement in after-hours lighthouse activities, explaining that while he certainly possessed the necessary skills, he was aware of the safety and legal issues involved in such work and would have approached the park system directly if he wanted to contribute to restoration efforts. The investigation expanded when William discovered additional restoration work on August 28th, this time involving detailed repairs to the lighthouse's interior staircase and observation deck. Again, the work was performed to museum quality standards and showed intimate knowledge of both historical construction techniques and modern safety requirements. This second incident was accompanied by a handwritten note tucked discreetly inside the lighthouse, written on weathered paper that appeared to have been aged intentionally to match the historical character of the building. The note read, "These beacons once guided countless souls safely home. They deserve to stand proud and strong for future generations who will need their light in dark times. Detective Foster arranged for analysis of the note and began to focus on people who combined restoration skills with deep emotional connection to maritime history and lighthouse preservation. This led her to consider Margaret Chun, a former maritime museum curator who had recently moved to the Oregon coast after retiring from her position at the Columbia River Maritime Museum. Margaret had spent 30 years working in maritime preservation and had developed expertise in both the technical aspects of restoration and the historical research necessary to ensure authenticity in preservation projects. She had been involved in lighthouse restoration projects throughout the Pacific Northwest and had written extensively about the cultural significance of maritime navigation aids. When Detective Foster interviewed Margaret at her cottage overlooking the Columbia River, she found a woman whose retirement had been devoted to continuing her preservation work on a volunteer basis. Margaret's home contained extensive reference materials on lighthouse construction and maintenance, and her conversation demonstrated passionate commitment to preserving maritime heritage. Under careful questioning, Margaret admitted that she had been responsible for the unauthorized restoration work at North Head Lighthouse. She explained that her actions had grown out of frustration with seeing historically significant structures deteriorating due to budget constraints and her desire to contribute her expertise to their preservation. Margaret had gained access to the lighthouse site through her knowledge of maintenance schedules and security routines, combined with her understanding of how to approach the structure safely using traditional access methods that didn't require modern security clearances. Her professional background had provided her with both the technical skills and the specialized equipment necessary for high-altitude restoration work. Her unauthorized restoration efforts had been motivated by deep concern for preserving maritime heritage and her belief that lighthouse preservation was too important to be delayed by budget considerations. Margaret had carefully researched appropriate materials and techniques, ensuring that her work met professional standards for historical authenticity and structural integrity. Each restoration project had been planned to address specific preservation needs that Margaret had identified during her observations of the lighthouse's condition. She had invested her own money in materials and had worked during carefully chosen periods when weather conditions and tidal schedules would minimize safety risks. Detective Foster found herself dealing with a case where trespassing and unauthorized construction had been motivated by professional expertise and genuine concern for historical preservation rather than any criminal intent. Margaret's actions were clearly violations of property access and construction regulations, but her motivations were rooted in dedication to cultural preservation, and her work had been beneficial rather than harmful. The resolution of the case required consideration of both regulatory violations and the valuable restoration work that Margaret had contributed. Oregon State Parks Management acknowledged that while her methods were inappropriate, her restoration work was professionally competent and had addressed real preservation needs that the park system had been unable to fund adequately. Rather than pursuing criminal prosecution, Detective Foster worked with parks officials and Margaret to develop a solution that addressed the access violations while recognizing her expertise and dedication. This resulted in Margaret being offered a consultant position with the park system that would allow her to contribute to lighthouse preservation through official channels. Margaret accepted this arrangement gratefully, understanding that it provided legitimate outlet for her preservation expertise while respecting proper procedures and safety protocols. Her work became a model for volunteer involvement in historical preservation and inspired additional funding for lighthouse maintenance programs throughout the region. The case had positive outcomes that extended beyond resolving Margaret's unauthorized activities. Her initiative brought renewed attention to lighthouse preservation needs and resulted in improved funding and volunteer programs that enhanced the maintenance of these important historical landmarks, the incident also prompted discussions within the preservation community about how to balance regulatory requirements with the passion for historical preservation that motivated many volunteers. Margaret's story became an example of how institutions could harness individual expertise while maintaining necessary safety standards and legal compliance. Asterisk. Our final story in this comprehensive collection of calming true crime audio takes us to Corvallis, Oregon, where November 2012 brought a touching mystery to Oregon State University's student housing system. The case began when Residence Hall Director Jessica Park discovered that someone had been leaving care packages and encouraging notes for students who appeared to be struggling with homesickness or academic stress. Oregon State University's residence halls served thousands of students, many of whom were living away from home for the first time and facing the challenges of adjusting to college life. The residence hall staff worked hard to create supportive environments, but the sheer number of students and the complexity of individual adjustment issues meant that some students' needs might go unnoticed during particularly difficult periods. Jessica Park had worked in student housing for 8 years, developing sensitivity to the signs that indicated when students were struggling with loneliness, academic pressure, or family concerns. She took pride in creating residence hall communities where students could find both independence and support. But she also understood the limitations of formal support systems in addressing every student's needs. The first care package appeared on November 6th, left outside the door of a freshman student who had been showing signs of severe homesickness and had been observed eating irregularly due to both financial constraints and emotional stress. The package contained healthy snacks, herbal tea, and a handwritten note offering encouragement and reminding the recipient that adjustment to college life was challenging for everyone. The care package included items that were both practical and thoughtful: granola bars and fresh fruit for nutrition, chamomile tea for relaxation, and a small notebook with an inscription suggesting that writing about experiences could help process difficult emotions. The selection showed understanding of both the practical needs of college students and the emotional support that might help during difficult transitions. Jessica examined the package carefully, noting the quality of the items and the thoughtful nature of the note, which was written in careful handwriting and demonstrated understanding of the challenges facing college students. However, she was concerned about the security implications of unknown persons gaining access to residence hall floors and the potential liability issues involved in anonymous food gifts. Campus Public Safety Officer David Kim was assigned to investigate what Jessica reported as unauthorized access to residence halls and potential safety concerns related to anonymous packages. Officer Kim had experience with various campus security issues and understood both the genuine care that motivated many campus community members and the legitimate safety concerns that unauthorized access created. Asterisk. The investigation began with examining how someone might have gained access to residence hall floors during periods when building security was active. The residence halls used electronic key card systems and had front desk monitoring, but the building's size and the constant flow of residents and visitors created opportunities for unauthorized persons to enter if they were familiar with student routines and building operations. Jessica provided Officer Kim with information about residence hall staff, graduate assistants, and student volunteers who would have both access to buildings and knowledge of which students might be struggling with adjustment issues. The residence hall system employed numerous staff members and relied on student peer advisors who developed relationships with residents and awareness of their individual circumstances. One person who drew Officer Kim's attention was Linda Martinez, a graduate student in counseling psychology who worked as a resident advisor in a neighboring residence hall. Linda had extensive training in recognizing signs of student distress and had often expressed concern about students who seemed to be struggling but were reluctant to seek formal support services. When Officer Kim interviewed Linda, He found a graduate student whose academic work focused on college student mental health and whose residence hall responsibilities had given her detailed knowledge of the challenges facing first-year students. Linda possessed both the access to residence halls and the professional knowledge necessary to identify students who might benefit from additional support. Linda expressed genuine concern about students who were struggling and seemed impressed by the thoughtfulness of the anonymous care packages. However, she denied any involvement in leaving packages for students, explaining that her official responsibilities as a resident advisor required her to work through formal support systems. Rather than providing anonymous assistance, the investigation expanded when Jessica discovered additional care packages over the following weeks, each targeted to students who were facing particular challenges and each accompanied by notes that demonstrated understanding of their specific situations and appropriate encouragement for their circumstances. Officer Kim began to consider the possibility that the care packages were being provided by someone who had extensive knowledge of student circumstances, but was not part of the formal residence hall system. This led him to focus on people who had regular contact with students, but might not have official channels for providing additional support. One person who fit this profile was Robert Chun, a custodial staff member who worked evening shifts in multiple residence halls and had developed informal relationships with many students through his regular presence in the buildings. Robert had worked for the university for 12 years and was known among students for his friendly demeanor and willingness to help with minor problems. When Officer Kim interviewed Robert, he found a man in his early 50s whose work schedule brought him into contact with students during evening hours when they were often dealing with stress and homesickness. Robert had observed many students over the years and had developed sensitivity to signs that indicated when individuals were struggling with college adjustment. Under gentle questioning, Robert admitted that he had been responsible for providing the anonymous care packages to students who appeared to be having difficult times. He explained that his actions had grown out of concern for young people who were far from home and seemed to need additional support beyond what formal systems could provide. Robert had observed students during his evening work rounds and had noticed when individuals seemed particularly lonely, stressed, or struggling with basic needs like nutrition and sleep. His position as custodial staff gave him access to residence halls and knowledge of student routines, while his years of experience had taught him to recognize signs of distress that others might miss. The care packages had been Robert's way of providing support without creating embarrassment or obligation for students who might be reluctant to seek formal help. He had carefully chosen items that would be both practical and encouraging, and had crafted notes that offered support while respecting students' privacy and independence. Robert had funded the care packages from his own modest salary, viewing the expense as worthwhile investment in helping young people succeed in their education. His selection of recipients had been based on his observations of student behavior and his understanding of the signs that indicated when additional support might be most helpful. Officer Kim found himself dealing with a case where unauthorized building access had been motivated by genuine care for student welfare and desire to provide support that complemented rather than replaced formal assistance systems. Robert's actions were technically violations of building security policies, but his motivations were clearly focused on student success and well-being. The resolution of the case required consideration of both security violations and the valuable support that Robert had been providing to students. University housing officials acknowledged that while his methods were inappropriate from a security standpoint, his care packages had provided meaningful assistance to students during difficult adjustment periods. Rather than pursuing disciplinary action against Robert, Officer Kim worked with housing administrators to develop a solution that addressed the security concerns while recognizing Robert's dedication to student welfare. This resulted in Robert being invited to participate in formal residence hall support programs, where his observations and caring could contribute to official student assistance efforts. Robert accepted this arrangement enthusiastically, understanding that it provided legitimate channels for his desire to help students while respecting proper procedures and safety protocols. His involvement in formal support programs became a model for how various campus staff members could contribute to student success initiatives. The case had positive outcomes that enhanced the residence hall community and created new models for identifying and supporting students who were struggling with college adjustment. Robert's story inspired other staff members to be more observant of student needs and to find appropriate ways to contribute to student support systems. His work with formal residence hall programs continued with official recognition of his contributions, and he became an advocate for the importance of having all campus community members involved in supporting student success. The Care Package program that grew out of his individual initiative became a formal offering that provided ongoing support for students while creating opportunities for the broader campus community to contribute to student welfare. Now, as we truly bring this comprehensive evening of true crime stories to fall asleep to its peaceful close, we can reflect on the profound wisdom contained within these 12 gentle mysteries from 2012. Our journey through these relaxing bedtime crime tales has taken us from the misty coastlines of Oregon and Washington to the university towns and urban centers that make up the heart of the Pacific Northwest. Each story revealing the fundamental goodness that exists within our communities. These audio stories for sleep have shown us repeatedly that what initially appears to be criminal behavior often masks the most admirable human qualities: love, dedication, creativity, generosity, and an unwavering commitment to making the world more beautiful, more just, or more supportive for others. Whether it was Alina seeking meaning through solitary reflection, Margaret honoring her husband's horticultural legacy, Thomas supporting struggling farmers market vendors, or Robert caring for homesick college students, each individual we've encountered was driven by positive impulses that sometimes led them beyond conventional boundaries. The law enforcement professionals who guided us through these nighttime crime tales: Detective Chun, Detective Gonzalez, Detective Sullivan, Detective Kim, Detective Torres, Detective Martinez, Detective Walsh, Constable Santos, Constable Kim, Detective Foster, Officer Kim, and all the others demonstrated remarkable wisdom in recognizing that true justice often requires understanding rather than punishment, collaboration rather than confrontation, and solutions that honor both legal requirements and human complexity. These true crime bedtime stories from 2012 illustrate that the most compelling mysteries in our world arise not from criminal intent, but from the passionate pursuit of beauty, knowledge, connection, and service to others. The individuals who found themselves at the center of these investigations: Elena, Emma, Daniel, Jennifer, David, Rebecca, Margaret, Michael, Thomas, Samuel, Linda, Robert, and all the others were ultimately seeking ways to contribute positively to their communities, even when their methods were unconventional or technically inappropriate. Our collection of sleep-friendly crime content has reminded us that behind every puzzle lies a human story worth understanding, and that most mysteries can be resolved through patience, empathy, and recognition of our shared experiences and values. These true crime with rain sound stories have shown us that communities function best when they respond to unusual situations with curiosity and compassion rather than immediate judgment and punishment. The gentle rhythm of rain that has accompanied us throughout these rainy night true crime tales serves as a perfect metaphor for the persistence and nurturing quality of human understanding. Just as rain nourishes growth and washes away the dust of daily life, the patient investigation and thoughtful resolution of these mysteries have revealed the growth potential in every challenging situation and the cleansing power of community understanding. These true crime stories to fall asleep to remind us that, in a world that often seems complicated and sometimes harsh, Most of the people we encounter are fundamentally good individuals who are doing their best to find meaning, create beauty, support others, and contribute positively to the world around them. When their efforts occasionally cross boundaries or violate conventions, the most productive response is usually to understand their motivations and help them find better ways to channel their positive impulses. As you drift into peaceful sleep with these calming true crime audio stories, accompanied by whatever gentle sounds of rain or wind may be falling outside your window tonight, remember that the same compassion and understanding that resolved each of these mysteries is available to address the challenges and puzzles in your own life. The community spirit and mutual support that characterized each resolution are resources that exist in every neighborhood and workplace, waiting to be activated by individuals who choose to look beyond surface appearances to understand the human stories beneath. Whether you're listening to these relaxing true crime stories during a quiet evening in the Pacific Northwest or anywhere else in the world where people seek comfort in gentle tales of human understanding, may these stories of community wisdom and compassionate resolution provide the perfect backdrop for the most restful and peaceful sleep. Thank you for spending this extended evening with Crime Stories for Sleep, exploring these 12 mysteries from 2012 that have reminded us of the power of patient investigation, community understanding, and the fundamental goodness that connects us all. These true crime sleep stories have shown us that even in our complex world, most puzzles reveal not criminal intent, but human hearts seeking to make positive contributions in their own unique ways. Until we meet again with more soothing mysteries and gentle resolutions, sleep deeply, dream peacefully, and carry with you the comforting knowledge that most of the people you encounter in life are, like the individuals in tonight's stories, fundamentally good people who are doing their best to create beauty, provide support, and make meaningful contributions to the world around them. Sweet dreams, and may the gentle wisdom of these true crime bedtime stories guide you toward the most restful slumber, filled with the same compassion and understanding that brought each of tonight's mysteries to their peaceful and positive conclusions. Our journey through these audio stories for sleep has taken us through 10 different cases, each demonstrating how apparent crimes frequently mask deeper stories of love, dedication, creativity, and community care. Whether it was Elena's search for meaning leading to an accidental fall, Emma's artistic expression of family frustration, Daniel's grateful appreciation during difficult times, or Thomas's anonymous generosity toward struggling vendors, each story has revealed the complex motivations that drive human behavior. These nighttime crime tales remind us that the most compelling mysteries often arise not from criminal intent, but from the passionate pursuit of beauty, connection, and meaning in our daily lives. The individuals we've encountered, Margaret tending to gardens in memory of her husband, Rebecca pursuing musical perfection, Jennifer honoring her aunt's literary legacy, Michael advancing information access, and David sharing artistic gifts with fellow travelers, all found themselves crossing boundaries because their dedication to values like beauty, knowledge, and community exceeded their concern for conventional rules. The law enforcement professionals in our True Crime with Rain Sound Stories: Detective Chun, Detective Gonzalez, Detective Sullivan, Detective Kim, Detective Torres, Constable Santos, Constable Kim, Detective Martinez, and Detective Walsh approached each case with patience and wisdom, recognizing that true resolution often requires understanding human motivations rather than simply enforcing regulations. Their responses demonstrated how communities can address unusual situations with creativity and compassion. These true crime stories to fall asleep to from 2012 illustrate the power of community understanding and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to comprehend the human stories that drive seemingly inexplicable behavior. Each resolution involved collaboration rather than punishment, recognition rather than condemnation, and solutions that honored both legal requirements and human complexity. As you settle into sleep with these calming, true crime audio stories, accompanied perhaps by the gentle sound of rain that has provided the soundtrack for our evening together, remember that even in our complex world, most mysteries can be resolved through patience, empathy, and recognition of our shared human experiences. These rainy night true crime tales remind us that behind every puzzle lies a person seeking connection, meaning, or beauty in their own unique way. Whether you're listening to these relaxing true crime stories during a quiet evening anywhere in the world, may these tales of understanding, community, and gentle resolution provide the peaceful backdrop for restful sleep and dreams filled with the same compassion and wisdom that guided each of these mystery solutions. Thank you for spending this evening with Crime Stories for Sleep, exploring these 10 gentle mysteries from 2012 that remind us of the power of human understanding and community support. Until we meet again with more soothing stories and peaceful resolutions, sleep well, dream peacefully, and remember that most mysteries in life, like those in our bedtime stories tonight, reveal the fundamental goodness that connects us all. Sweet dreams. And may the gentle rhythm of rain and the comfort of these true crime sleep stories guide you toward the most restful and peaceful slumber. From Elena Vasquez's hiking accident in coastal Oregon to Margaret Chen's loving tribute to her husband's legacy in Victoria's Gardens, each case in our True Crime Bedtime Stories collection has demonstrated how apparent crimes often conceal more complex stories of human need, creativity, and connection. These relaxing true crime stories remind us that behind every mystery lies a person with motivations that, once understood, often reveal our shared humanity rather than criminal intent. Detective Sarah Chun investigating Elena's disappearance. Detective Maria Gonzalez unraveling the gallery puzzle. Detective James Sullivan solving the coffee shop mystery. Each of these dedicated professionals approach their cases with patience and understanding, recognizing that true resolution often requires addressing underlying human needs rather than simply enforcing laws. The individuals at the center of these audio stories for sleep. Alina seeking clarity about her life choices. Emma expressing family frustrations through artistic intervention. Daniel finding solace in anonymous gratitude. Jennifer honoring her aunt's memory. David channeling appreciation into unauthorized collaboration. Rebecca pursuing perfection in musical maintenance. And Margaret, continuing her husband's horticultural legacy, all found themselves taking actions that technically violated rules, but stemmed from deeper emotional truths. These calming true crime audio stories from 2012 illustrate how communities can respond to unusual situations with creativity and compassion, finding solutions that honor both legal requirements and human complexity. Each resolution involved understanding rather than punishment, collaboration rather than confrontation, and recognition that people's motivations often reflect positive impulses that have been misdirected rather than genuinely criminal intent. As you drift off to sleep with these relaxing bedtime crime stories, perhaps accompanied by the gentle sound of rain that has woven through each tale, remember that even in our complex world, most mysteries can be solved through patience, understanding, and recognition of our shared human experiences. These true crime stories to fall asleep to remind us that behind every puzzle lies a story of human connection, waiting to be understood. Whether you're listening during a rainy evening in the Pacific, Northwest, or anywhere else in the world where people seek comfort in these true crime sleep stories, may these tales of community, understanding, and gentle resolution provide the peaceful backdrop for restful sleep and pleasant dreams. Thank you for joining us for this collection of crime stories for sleep. Until we meet again with more soothing mysteries and gentle resolutions, sleep well and dream peacefully.